Yeah, very good morning, everybody. Joined by Kena Mahamate, our Vice President as always, ever present. With myself, Evan Jansen. It's nice to be with you guys on this Thursday. Of course, we're dealing with our theme today. We're talking about illegal electricity connections, and we ask a question: should illegal electricity connections be declared economic sabotage, and those responsible receive hefty jail sentences? We're losing about 20 billion rand a year. Well, that's a rough estimate to electricity theft. But Elvis, there are also some interesting court cases in the offing today.
Very interesting court cases here, Ben. Now today, following the High Court in Pretoria that will today hear the joint application by the Helen Suzman Foundation and the Freedom Under Law, they have asked the President to suspend Shaun Abrahams from the NPA. So we're asking you that question on the poll today. Should the NPA head, Shaun Abrahams, be suspended? Kendall, and what we got there?
We've got 110 votes, and of those 110, 79% agree that Shaun Abrahams should be suspended, whereas 21% reckon a different process should be followed.
All right. Well, interesting. That's interesting. We'll have that, and of course, Mr. Mutsuneng's court case in the Western Cape High Court. We'll have an update on that as well today. But there's a cricket match on in Adelaide.
100%.
Historic match for South Africa, but it hasn't been a great start, has it?
It hasn't been a great start. It seems like some of the off the field shenanigans have taken a toll on their state of mind, I think, because they've been under the cosh.
Under the pump, says Kena Mahamate. Well, anyhow, there's a whole lot of other news for us to look at. Let's go get the morning's headline news with Elvis.
The Helen Suzman Foundation and Freedom Under Law's court application to compel the President, Jacob Zuma, to suspend the NPA head, Shaun Abrahams, and two other officials is expected to be heard today. The Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is today expected to announce its final interest rate decision for the year. We'll keep you updated on that one. And lawyers representing Claudia Mutsuneng and SABC are expected to submit arguments opposing the DA's application to remove the Group Executive for Corporate Affairs from his position. Those are all your headlines. But before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front. As you just indicated, we're under the cosh in Adelaide. Yeah, definitely. Like, the pressure's been put on by the Australians. But tell you what, we've got live pictures coming out of Australia right now, which we're going to share with you out at home. And I'll let you know exactly what's been going on. There we go. Faf du Plessis, as well as now Quinton de Kock, are really trying to steal the resistance and steady the ship after some early wickets were lost to the Australians. Faf du Plessis, I believe, is on the verge of getting his half century. So we do hope that they do well and actually get over the 200 mark, at least in that first innings.
Yeah, very good. 3 points, 3 goals. Could have been more, but yeah, we're happy. Before I continue, because I know I'll forget, I'm asking everybody to vote for Kekana. Africa must vote for Kekana.
Coach Peter Musimane puts in a good word for his captain, Shompo Kekana, for the 2016 Pushkash Award as the Mamelodi Sundowns thump Arrows by 3-0.
Luis Suarez.
And in the UEFA Champions League, Lionel Messi fires group top in Barcelona into the next round as his brace destroys a brave but helpless Celtic.
Neymar through to Messi, delicious ball, brilliant finish, Lionel Messi again.
Now, all this and more we'll be bringing to you in more detail at about 10:40. For now, it is back to Elvis, who's got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. The National Prosecuting Authority is in the spotlight again today. The High Court in Pretoria will hear the joint application of the Helen Suzman Foundation and the Freedom Under Law, their application to try to compel the President, Jacob Zuma, to suspend the NPA head, Shaun Abrahams, and two other officials. The organisation wants the President to suspend Abrahams, Dr. Turi Pretorius, as well as Advocate Sibongile Mzinyati, pending an inquiry into their fitness to hold office. President Zuma has written to the trio requesting them to give reasons why they should not be suspended, pending an inquiry. Advocate Abrahams have been under scrutiny after he charged the former SARS bosses, Minister Pravin Gordhan, Ivan Pillay, as well as Oupa Magashule, with fraud relating to Pillay's retirement package. 2 weeks after they were charged, Abrahams announced that he was withdrawing all the charges against them. Now today, the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee will announce its final interest rate decision for the year. The bank has kept the repo rate steady at 7% since March. The prime lending rate is at 10.5%. Now today's announcement will come as inflation slows down and economic growth remains sluggish. Meanwhile, two ratings agencies are set to announce their assessment of South Africa's credit rating. Moody's is expected to make an announcement tomorrow, and Standard & Poor's will announce its decision next week. President Jacob Zuma says that government efforts to introduce labour market reforms are a positive step towards staving off the sovereign credit ratings downgrades. Lawyers representing Claudie Motsoeneng and the SABC will today submit arguments in the Western Cape High Court in Cape Town as to why the Group Executive for Corporate Affairs should not be fired. Yesterday, legal counsel for the Democratic Alliance asked the court to relieve Motsoeneng of his duties, saying he was clearly not fit to hold any senior position. Today, the SABC will take to the stand in the Western Cape High Court, brought by the DA to have Claudie Motsoeneng as the Group Executive for Corporate Affairs declared invalid. Yesterday's proceedings started with the court dismissing the application by the two organizations and an individual to be admitted as friends of the court. The DA came out strongly against Motsoeneng and the SABC, calling the disciplinary hearing against him a charade. The party brought two applications for Motsoeneng to be removed from his current position and for the disciplinary hearing to be set aside. Today, the SABC lawyers will present arguments against the case put by the DA. Now, yesterday, President Jacob Zuma made his last appearance before MPs for this year in the National Assembly, where he said that no one can instruct the president to appoint a commission of inquiry. As you can recall, former Public Protector Thuli Madonsela recommended that the president appoint a commission of inquiry to probe state capture further as she wound up her work in her 7-year term. The president also reiterated that no poor deserving students would be excluded from attending tertiary institutions. Other issues dealt with were the ratings agencies, the possible impact of Brexit, and the closure of the Gupta-owned Oak Bay company's bank account.
Taking to the podium for the last time this year to answer questions in Parliament, a number of issues taking center stage, from student protests over fees to ratings agencies and the state capture report. The Public Protector recommended the appointment of a judicial commission.
Even the manner in which the recommendation is, it is the president who has the right to appoint a commission. No one, no matter what position they hold, can instruct the president to establish a commission and even tell the process through which you must go. It's very funny. I've never heard of it. So that's a problem that we are faced with.
Under discussion, student protests over fees, to which the president reiterated that no deserving student from a poor background would be excluded.
One of the things that the government has done is to say there will be no child who will not go to school because the family has no money. That in itself is important for the students. For the students who are protesting, that we are not just ignoring the matter, but we want to get the lasting solution to the problem. Because as you know, education is our priority number one. We are not in conflict in terms of whether the children or the people should go to school or not. It's a question of how do we deal with the question of the cost.
On the economic front, the ratings agencies are in the country assessing the economic situation.
We are ready to tell them the truth about the economic situation in the country. They will take their decision. What we've been doing all the time is to try to grow the economy of this country.
On the closure of Oak Bay accounts, the president said simultaneous events of the banks led to government to investigate what's going on.
Here, there was an action by a number of banks at the same time. It suggested there is something untoward here. And as government, We wanted constructively to interact with the banks to find out what is this, what are they doing, where has this come from?
The question and answer is the final one this year. Mzwandile Mbethe, SABC News.
Now, in reaction, the Economic Freedom Fighter says that that was the last time that President Zuma would address the National Assembly while it's represented in Parliament. The party deliberately stayed away from the President's question and answer session. It said that it vowed to protect Parliament from President Zuma in the future, but refused to divulge the details of what such protection would entail.
EFF members of Parliament were conspicuous in their absence from today's question and answer session. It meant that for the first time since November 2014, the President faced no disruptions in the House.
As the EFF would not recognize Jacob Zuma as head of state and government, that is why we are not participating in the process today. But in the future, be rest assured, as the EFF are going to protect this Parliament from Jacob Zuma.
Asked to elaborate on what he meant by protecting Parliament, Shivambu was rather coy, saying only the details will be revealed closer to next year's State of the Nation address.
As part of that protection of Parliament, we're not going to just do it as a political party separately alone. We're going to make sure that as many people as possible come to protect our Parliament from criminals, to protect this institution from people who do not respect the Constitution. So we're going to involve as many people as possible.
Meanwhile, the ruling party says it is happy that even though the President was humiliated in Parliament, he honoured his obligation.
Is in Parliament. He has been ridiculed over a period of time. He has been called names. He has been caricatured. But he has honoured his constitutional obligation throughout the year. Today is his last day to answer in this year at least. And I think the President has shouldered the responsibility of being the head of state as expected in terms of the constitution of the country, that he must continue to come and account to Parliament. And I think today we must take the opportunity to thank all parties, including the opposition, that we have never seen in a long time such a civilized and order in Parliament.
Next year's State of the Nation address is expected around the 9th of February. Lukhanyo Chalada, SABC News, Parliament.
Acting Police Commissioner Komotso Bahlani has not given a warning statement at IPID's offices in Pretoria, as was expected. Bahlani had been expected to make the statement in relation to a charge of defeating the ends of justice. The charge relates to an IPID probe into an upmarket house that he built in the exclusive Sable Hills waterfront estate north of Pretoria. After receiving media queries about the probe, Bahlani reportedly cancelled going to IPID. The Directorate has been interviewing witnesses to gather information on how Bahlani, a career policeman, managed to afford a residence that is worth about 8 million rand. It's alleged that he interfered with witnesses during an investigation into the construction of his luxury house. Electricity theft is costing South Africa more than 20 billion rand per annum. Now, Eskom has appealed to the government to act swiftly against illegal electrical connections. The power utility has launched Operation Kanyisa about 6 years ago to fight illegal connections. Through Operation Kanyisa, South Africans are urged to stop electricity theft. But it's not just a South African problem. Globally, billions are lost each year due to electricity theft. It is estimated that the US loses approximately $6 billion annually due to electricity theft, and the United Kingdom almost 300 million pounds each year from gas and electricity theft, resulting in electricity becoming the third most stolen commodity following credit card information and vehicles. Now, from Eskom, we are joined by the head of Operation Kanyisa, Dilip John. A very good morning to you, Mr. John, and welcome.
Good morning to you as well.
Give us an idea how big the problem is here in South Africa in terms of rand terms for electricity theft.
The Eskom problem it ranges in the amount of about 5 billion, just under 5 billion rands. And if you look at the reported figures for municipalities combined, it's about 15 billion. So you're looking at about a 20 billion rand non-technical losses or theft problem in South Africa.
Can you say it's now running for 6 years? How successful has it been?
Well, we've seen a significant reduction in losses. There's a lot more to be achieved still, but our losses have dropped from about 7.12% to 6.4%. In rand terms, that equates to about more than R1 billion per annum of savings. But the picture that remains in terms of the 5 billion is still work that we need to do in curbing this problem.
Where does the losses, the biggest losses occur rather? Is it in business or is it households?
Well, you know, the perception is that it's typically in households, but if you look at the Eskom picture, it's across the board. More than half of what we lose comes from the non-residential sector, which is your business, your agriculture, what we call BICA, the business, industrial, commercial and agricultural as well. So it's spread across.
From a percentage perspective, what would you say?
I would say about more than 50% lies in the non-residential space. We call it non-residential, and it applies to, like I said, the business, industrial, commercial, etc.
So what strategies then you have as Eskom in order to curb these illegal connections, or shall we call them the theft, really, of electricity from business?
Yeah, see, it's quite a complex problem, electricity theft. So we've got a multi-pronged approach that we follow. Firstly, we try and make use of the information we have at our disposal to what we call energy balancing. We reconcile the energy flows on our network to find out where the leaks are. Secondly, you know, with most of our big customers, we have their instantaneous consumption profiles. So we can look at trends, patterns, and the moment we pick up anomalies, we send out our investigation teams or technical teams to the field. So we have teams that go out to the field, and we have processes in place to issue tamper fines, recover the revenue, etc. Over and above that, we make use of technology. Where we have recurring problems, we make use of technology in the form of split meters, smart meters with protective enclosures to prevent access to the metering environment. We also have the law enforcement part of it. We have support from the SABC, from the judicial system, where we investigate and prosecute perpetrators of the crime. But all of this talks to the compliance side of things. But the key part for us is that, you know, we've launched the Operation Kanisa campaign knowing that compliance alone is not going to win this battle for us. We have to change customer behavior. And the Operation Kanisa campaign is one of our key strategies of educating and informing South Africans of the consequences, the impact of electricity theft on the economy, on society, etc. And in doing so, we're hoping that there will be collective ownership for the problem, and that we will, in a partnership with time, solve it.
Now, I'm sure that you do have the stats available. Where does the biggest losses occur? Is it in rural areas or is it urban areas?
See, it's spread across. I would say maybe higher in the urban areas because, you know, especially in terms of the number of customers that we have. Our urban areas have a lot of customers, so if you look at the losses we incur in the urban areas, it's definitely going to be higher.
What are you doing about households? Because especially when it comes to illegal connections, squatter camps are backyard and those sort of small businesses operating, they connect illegally. So what are you doing about them, and is there a strategy in place to assist these type of customers?
Yeah. When it comes to, let's say, the lower income sector, the residential sector, yes, we have a lot of illegal connections, and our strategy is part of the inspections yields or results in the removal of these illegal connections and things like that. And sometimes we have community resistance, but we try and make use of the support that we get from the law enforcement agencies to try and curb, to try and deal with it. But for us, the key thing there is that, you know, we have a combination of factors. For example, we've got things like free basic electricity, which talks to, the indigent.
Yes.
And over and above that, we have inclining block tariffs that look at incentivizing you to be energy efficient and hence pay less. But as with any other product, you've got to pay for the service.
Yes.
So
now, if you look at the the causes or the root causes of electricity theft? What is it? Is it just because people want to be connected and don't have the economic means to pay for it?
You see, it's a combination of factors. I would say one of the biggest factors is the criminal element behind it. You know, a lot of people do this for self-enrichment. You get syndicates who provide this as a service to our communities. So there is definitely a criminal element behind it, which is what we're trying to tackle through the law enforcement. But we do have, you know, legacy issues where, you know, some sort of non-payment was being used as a mechanism to, you know, to protest against the previous regime. And some of that has continued even into the democratic dispensation. Yes, affordability is an issue. And there are mechanisms, like I mentioned, the free basic electricity and, you know, the inclining block tariffs and things like that that have been put in place to try and assist. So yeah, these are kind of like the reasons behind.
What is the way forward now for Eskom? Because it seems like it is a huge problem, but you did say there is perhaps an indication that the percentage-wise that you are winning the war against illegal electricity theft.
Yeah, see, the interesting thing about losses or electricity theft is that, like with any other crime, you know, the moment you take your foot off the pedal, things just go back south. So the key thing is for us to continuously push through with our compliance programs, but at the same time build very strong partnerships with communities, with businesses. And our agenda would be to push through the issue of collective compliance, because you know, this matter of being your brother's keeper. You know, if we call each other to account, the chances are, you know, with time we will win it. So and hence the emphasis on Operation Kanisa as a campaign to propagate the message.
Mr. Deep, thank you so much for your time and joining us here in studio.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
That was Dilip John. He is from Eskom. He is the head of Operation Kanisa, chatting to us about illegal connections and electricity theft. What are you doing about it?
Yeah, this major concern it is, I can tell you. 20 billion rand annually, that is a lot of money. Of course, we've asked you the question of the day, pop up on the screen. We ask, should this be considered economic sabotage? And those responsible, should they receive hefty jail sentences? Then in turn, to kind of, well, send the message with regards to this. Let's take a look at some of your tweets coming in on our question of the day before we move on. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. Thomas Sekhabetla says, Newsroom, yes, electricity zinyoka have to get at least 7 years in jail, not a life sentence, please. Only 7 years, not life sentence. IH Natso says, Newsroom, government should start by providing electricity to each and every household as it is stipulated on the Bill of Rights. This one from Shafana Zulu Eshowe says, yes, and those people that are using the electricity without a permission of Eskom, they must go to jail. Tough. Unati says, yes, they should declare it as sabotage and put those who connect illegally behind bars. I think the sentiment is quite simple. People believe that we need to make an example of those that continue with this kind of behavior. That's our question of the day. Keep on tweeting. We've also got a poll at SABC Newsroom that you can interact with. But let's move on to looking at what are the hashtags you should be looking at? What are the social trends right now? Now, of course, the hashtag Sean Abrahams today in the court, in the High Court in Pretoria today. We'll hear the joint application of the Helen Suzman Foundation and Freedom Under Law. We're trying to convince President Zuma to suspend the NPA head. This after he laid fraud charges against the finance minister and then withdrew them, sending the rand into some chaos. Then, at Social SA has captioned this image. Stress, Mr. Abrahams, I recommend a visit to the spa. Well, everyone's a comedian these days. Then, Save SA is still trending from yesterday. The organization is calling for the president to resign, of course. Some other tweets using this group's name in other ways. Unati Grootboom, who's a regular contributor, he said, please, before we save SA, let's save workers from being paid peanuts. We can't have slavery money on our hands. And then Little Wisdom says, just save SA already. Some sporting trends, of course, the day-night test. If we take live pictures, shortly we'll take live pictures, a big setback just now for South Africa. It's underway right now, up against the Aussies in Adelaide, of course. However, Faf du Plessis was greeted by a chorus of boos from home fans as he walked out to bat. But people are still talking about, well, what's just happened. And I can tell you what has just happened, well, is that Quinton de Kock has just lost his wicket. So South Africa are 6 down for 149. Then moving further afield, it's Thanksgiving in the USA, a tradition where you in South Africa don't celebrate, but it's time, a time of taking a day to reflect on all the things that you are thankful and grateful for. Let's take a look at the wonderful quote. Look to the fellow human next to you. Find something you have in common and connect to that. Lovely. I love that. Then there's a message from the President-elect, Donald Trump. There's no sound, unfortunately. Then, of course, let's move on. An image from the White House account is captioned, we should make sure everyone has something to eat on Thanksgiving, of course, except the turkeys, because they already stuffed. Ish, tough, huh? Then many thoughts are also going out to the soldiers who can't be home for the holidays, and some are taking time to mourn their loved ones, but also being thankful for their life. Here we see some sad and powerful images. Then let's have a look at a meme that says, both dark and white meat matter. Bit of a read between the lines, I think. In South Korea, the hashtag there, so millions are demanding that their president, Park Geun-hye, to step down. There were also rumors that he uses Viagra for altitude sickness, which his office has, well, awkwardly been trying to explain. The hashtag you can look at there, of course, is Viagra. Now, yesterday we asked you, can we avoid a possible ratings downgrade? Let's have a look at some of your comments. Of course, tomorrow we'll get the first news from the ratings agency with regards to this. Now, this was yesterday. It's avoidable if all government structures together with business are working together at this harmony to bring certainty and trust. That one from Ikona Natural. The Reverend says, Newsroom, not at this juncture. Jobless figures are on the up, unaccounted expenditure on the high, debt burden high, says the Reverend. And Unati says, yes, we can do it. Simple one. Yes, we can do it. Now let's take a look at our picture of the day. This one comes from Rick Bruty and is captioned, first jukebox was installed 127 years ago today at the Palace Royal Saloon in San Francisco. Let's take a look at that. That's the first jukebox, 127 years ago. Our picture of the day. Now, let's take a look at our comment of the day. This one comes from King David Journey at True Child 87. He says, can South Africa take a commercial ad break for like 2 months? I'm tired. And he's specifically talking about Police Commissioner Patlane. Who, of course, is in the crosshairs at the moment. Now, it's a busy morning in the courts. Let's take a quick roundup of what's happening all around the country. In the Western Cape High Court, where lawyers representing Claudi Mutsuneng and the SABC will today submit their arguments as to why the Group Executive for Corporate Affairs should not be fired. Then, in Pretoria, the High Court is expected to hear the joint application of the Helen Suzman Foundation, as well as Freedom Under Law, to compel President Zuma to suspend NPA head Sean Abrahams and 2 other officials. In Limpopo, the Basic Education Department says it's likely to withhold the results of matriculants implicated in the Limpopo exam cheating scandal. Tinyiko Koza, who's accused of leaking at least 1 paper, is expected to be back in the Giyani Magistrates Court. Now, lots happening in the courts. We'll keep you updated on all of those. But first, we're going to take a short commercial break.
It's more than a gift. It's capturing summer magic. Get a Galaxy S7 Edge with Tab 3 Lite bundle for $6.99 per month on My MTN Choice Flexi 200. Plus your choice of a Gear VR or an accessory kit. The Galaxy S7 Edge, now in blue coral.
We make sure to be where news is happening,
both locally and globally. For the latest business news, stay with us.
From South Africa to the world, we've got all your latest sporting news.
Don't miss our weather updates every hour.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday, from 3 to 5:30 p.m. here on SABC News.
Flexible.
Now, as you know, we're asking you that question today. Very important question. It all relates to electricity and illegal connections that people do in the townships and wherever they are, and small businesses in the backyards. We're asking you, should illegal electricity connections be declared economic sabotage? And those that are responsible should receive hefty jail sentences. That's the question. I'd like to get your response on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom, as well as on our Facebook page. We'll read them as we continue here today. But local municipalities owe Eskom 9 billion rands in electricity debt. The South African Local Government Association, SALGA, is an autonomous association of municipalities with its mandate derived from the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. The association is a unitary body with a membership of 257 municipalities, with its national office based in Pretoria and offices in all 9 provinces. Joining us now in studio is Nhlanhla Ngidi, who is the head of electricity and energy at SALGA. Mr. Ngidi, a very good morning to you and welcome. All right, Bob. Now, 9 billion rand. It's quite a lot of money being owed by the municipalities to Eskom. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's quite an issue. It's a problem. You know, there's a lot of things that as SALGA we try to do. But first thing first, before you do anything drastic or technical, you know, this has to do a lot with the mindset of the people, because the municipalities are owing Eskom 9 billion, and it's not because municipalities are despondent and not want to pay Eskom, but there's a lot of casual issues that emanates to those kind of debts escalating. One of them is high non-payment rates from the public itself. Municipalities themselves are owed over 100 billion. In total. In
terms of rates, taxes and everything else,
including electricity as well. And for them, it's actually quite hard to actually recoup that. But as SALGA, we actually try to actually support them first, as I said, before you go drastic, change the mindset of the people. You know, because the issue is here, people want to use electricity and not pay. Let's promote the notion of paying for what you use. If you can't pay for what you use, if you can actually afford 200 rand for electricity, use 200 rand. Be efficient. And that's where it starts. And another issue we have is that mentality of entitlement to free things. I think these are some other things that we need to change. And through that Eskom Khanyisa, Operation Khanyisa program, which we are partner to, this is what we're trying to do, you know, to teach the public, or actually, you know, try to make the public aware. What does the illegal connection mean? What are you doing? What is the notion of an unsustainable municipality?
Before we get to illegal connections, the culture of non-payment, do you think that that's endemic, and what are you as SALGA doing to assist these municipalities to pay their debt?
Actually, we have to be very pragmatic at this moment in time, because, you know, we have this attitude of people not really abiding to the policies and laws of municipalities. So with that, we actually have to try to be very pragmatic. What we do is we assist the municipalities in drafting, you know, very stringent credit policies, where we actually suggest that if a person cannot pay, cut them off. Don't be nice. Cut them off. You actually pay for what you use. If you can't, let's cut you off. If people are not paying or are indebted to a municipality, take them to ITC, blacklist them. you know people squeal when when you are dealing with their credit record. So take them to ITC, blacklist them. That's what you do. Technically, what we do is, on your designs, because you know that people are actually, stealing electricity. On your designs, maybe you have an overhead network. Try to be above standards. Don't use a 6-meter pole, because people go to macro and buy a 6-meter staircase and actually climb in there and connect. Maybe use a 12-meter pole. Some of those things to over-design your network so that you actually go away from the issue of illegal connections. Issues of smart metering, which also send signals when tampered with, and protective structures. So those are some of the technical things that we actually advise municipalities to do. But it's just a long list.
Now, we spoke to ESCOM earlier and Operation Kanyisa, and they say education is very important, especially for these communities. Are you part and parcel of that particular drive, and what else are you doing to ensure that residents specifically, who's got a responsibility to pay their debt, are really adhering?
Thank you for that. We are part and parcel of the Operation Kanyisa, but over and above that, as SALCA also, we do our own drives, where we actually, talk to the public on the ground through our councillors, our ward councillors, to actually educate them. We're actually going to be doing councillor inductions in the early next year for new councillors. We're actually trying to get them to, explain to the public the notion of an unsustainable municipality. Municipalities are discharged with a mandate to actually service all the people, not just you. But if you are 1 or 2 people and you are actually, illegally connecting, you might be actually hampering access for 20 or 50 people just for your selfishness. So we try to actually do our own drives over and above the Operation Kanyisa as well.
Do you, as SALGA, has the teeth and the sort of the power to make sure that municipalities pay their debt? And what are we going to do about the 9 billion rand?
Yes, 9 billion rand, yeah, as I said, it's actually quite high. But there's a lot of issues, I want to explain. I think we owe it to the public, because out there, when ESCOM go on public, talk about the municipalities as if municipalities are despondent. But there's a lot of casual issues or casual matters that actually, escalates the issue. Some of it is actually even the very ESCOM existence within the industry, the policies of ESCOM that are actually hampering the municipalities as their customer. One of them will be, the prime plus 5% interest on outstanding amount for ESCOM. It's almost the same as owing a mashonisa. If you are actually owing a mashonisa 1,000 rand and the interest is 400 rand, and you are getting paid, or you're getting a revenue of 350 rand, so the rest of your life you'll be servicing the interest. So that's the issue, some of those issues. But, while we have those kind of issues, we do negotiate with ESCOM, try to assist municipalities to get better, payment arrangements, affordable payment arrangements with ESCOM. Some of them do default again on payment arrangements, but when you address or assess the situation, you find that really it's issues that are beyond their control. That is why, in my view, I think this is no longer a municipal problem. It's actually a country problem, because there's issues of skill in the municipalities. There's issue of funding model of the municipalities, which is very unsustainable at this moment in time. So as government, we have to engage with other in terms of reviewing the funding models. The economic conditions of the country are actually even another casual factor to this, because municipalities are actually servicing the communities that are poor and unemployed. So how do you get revenue from that?
Just briefly, 15 seconds, who is the biggest culprit within the municipalities?
Biggest culprits in what
The municipalities not paying their debts.
I wouldn't call them culprits because at the end of the day, as I said, it's always been a plan of municipalities to pay ESCOM, but we have to engage each other. There are some internal policies of ESCOM that needs to be looked at, and they escalate the issue or the problems that municipalities have. And from the municipality side, as SALCA also, we have to make sure and promote that municipalities pay for what you use, as well as we tell customers to do that in the same spirit.
Mr. Ngidi, I thank you so much for your time, and good luck. You've got a big job ahead of you.
Yeah, thank you.
That was Nhlanhla Ngidi. He's the head of electricity and energy at SALGA. The question, once again, what are you doing about it? And what should be done to the culprits, you think? Illegal electricity. What should be done to those culprits? Should illegal electricity connections be declared economic sabotage, And those responsible, should they go to jail? That's the question. Let us know on the Twitter handle as well. It's on the Facebook page. Let's go over to Eben to find out what's happening on social media.
Yeah, we've been asking a question, of course. We've been running a poll, actually, of course, Freedom Under Law and the Helen Suzman Foundation in the court today with regards to a possible suspension of the MPA head, Sean Abraham. So we've run a poll. Let's have a look where we're at with the poll right now. Should NPA head Sean Abrahams be suspended? We've got 130 voters in, and 82% of you say yes, he should be suspended right now. Let's take a look what some of the comments you're sending in to us with regards to the poll that we are running as well. This one from Unati. He says, I think Sean Abraham scored an own goal, so suspension will do just fine for the nation. This one from Rangwane Marumo. He says, Newsroom, if he's suspended, it will be with full pay. Those are the comments coming in on our poll right now. Let's go onto our Facebook page. You can see what you can get there. Of course, today we see the Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee will announce its final interest rate decision for the year. The bank has kept the repo rate steady at 7% since March. The prime lending rate is now at 10.5%. We can also see South African farmers intend to plant 35% more hectares of maize than last season, as improved weather conditions encourage them to sow. This according to a Reuters poll from earlier in the week. Go and read that story. It's an interesting one. Finally, at least 40 people have died and others are still trapped after a platform under construction at a power plant's cooling tower in eastern China's Jiangxi province collapsed. This according to the news agency Xinhua in that country. You can also go to sabc.co.za/news for all the latest updates. Let's now take a quick roundup from the newspapers of the world. In the UK, The Guardian reports that Thomas Mayer has been jailed for life after being found guilty of the murder of Labour MP Joe Cox. Then in China, the South China Morning Post says Hong Kong's publicly funded universities need to be more international, as 76% of non-local students enrolled in the 8 institutions in the last academic year were from the mainland. That's according to the city's official auditor. Then, finally, New York, the Wall Street Journal reports that UK Treasury Chief Philip Hammond signalled a new course after almost a decade of belt-tightening yesterday, saying he expects billions in extra borrowing over the next few years to support an economy predicted to slow as it exits the European Union. We'll take a short commercial break. When we come back, well, we'll talk about electricity theft, but what are some of the solutions? Alternative energy. That will be our next interview. Should be interesting. Don't go away.
It's Black Friday weekend at Macro with hundreds of deals that are too big for Friday only. Get the Terrace Leisure Saturn 590 4-burner gas fry, only 2,999. Save 2,000 rand. A Hisense 220-litre fridge with top freezer, only 1,899. Save 900 rand. And the LG 55-inch smart UHD LED TV for 9,999. Save 3,000 rand. Don't miss Macro's Black Friday weekend. This Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Save up to 45% on selected in-store and online deals. Macro. Big on life.
Proceedings of the Fees Commission has once again been disrupted.
We as a university do not feel that fee-free higher education currently is feasible.
It's a Mickey Mouse commission. During in the commission, student grievances, we're not a part of the commission in the program. So that is why we tend to disturb the program.
If you tell me that I can't leave, then you are keeping me hostage.
Some students demanded that UCT lift the suspensions and expulsions of certain students.
Hello again, everybody. Very good morning. If you've just joined us, you're watching Newsroom here on SABC News. Now, before we carry on with our show, let's just go to the cricket. I'm a big cricket nut, so I'd like to have a look at some of the live pictures. They're taking at the wickets, a look at the wickets. There's the live action. South Africa 7 down for 162. There you have Captain Faf du Plessis fighting a lone hand as it is right now. He's on 64, 64 not out. South Africa 7 for 163. It looks like a long, hard slog from there. That was the last, well, the second last wicket to fall. That was Quinton de Kock, caught behind. Of course, shortly after that, this happened. Dodgy decision again. Hit him on the hip. He was given out. Well, even after review, he was still seemed to be out. 7 for 163, 163 for 7. South Africa under the pump in Adelaide. Now, few South Africans have forgotten the 2008 electricity shortages that severely affected households and businesses alike. Now, with nuclear plans being placed on the back burner, at least for 20 years or so, an alternative energy solution has since been given, well, the spotlight for its beneficial technology harnessed from, well, our biggest free source, the sun. Eskom has also encouraged the usage of alternative energy. Now, I'm joined in studio by Sena's Regional Managing Director, Siyabonga Mbanjwa, to talk about renewable energy. A very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Before we talk about renewable energy, where are we now with our national grid? Is it under threat still?
I think we're in a position now where things have really stabilized. There are a few new units that have come onto the grid. And demand has also dropped a little bit. As you know, it's been well over 14 months or so where we've actually had no load shedding at this point in time. So things have really stabilized.
Alternative energy solutions. I've just read out that, of course, nuclear plants are being shelved, but the handbrake is being put on a little bit by the look of it. This is the ideal time then for us to really push the envelope on renewables, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The program that was started about 4 or 5 years ago, which is the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, has been a very successful program. And in our view, this program needs to continue. We need to to continue with these projects.
Talk about how equipped we are to include renewables as an alternative energy source to businesses and consumers alike.
Well, basically, what we are doing as SENE, which is an engineering and technology group, what we are doing is we are assisting our utility, Eskom, businesses, consumers ultimately by basically building renewable energy power plants. And those power plants then basically provide renewable energy to Eskom, who then on-sells it to businesses as well as consumers.
I was fortunate enough to spend some time with Brian Molefe, the former head of Eskom at BRICS in India, and the discussion point was around nuclear energy and alternative energy solutions. What we're talking about now, the main concern that he had at the time with me was that we need nuclear energy because we need to drive an industrial revolution in South Africa.
Absolutely.
And alternative energy, there's just not strong enough to drive that industrial revolution. What do you say to that kind of informed view?
Well, the concerns from Eskom basically stem around exactly what you're saying, but maybe just to clarify it even more, the concern is that because when you talk about renewable energy, you're talking about wind, you're talking about solar, and solar basically is split into solar PV, which is a photovoltaic, as well as concentrated solar power. So, for example, you can generate electricity during the day whilst the sun is out, and then as soon as the sun goes down in the afternoon, then that means you're no longer generating. So the concern, though, is that there's demand in the afternoon and in the evening. When everyone gets back home and they put on their kettle, they start their TVs and they start cooking, demand goes up. But at that point in time, renewable energy, according to Eskom, is not there. But what we are saying is there is a certain technology type called concentrated solar power, which basically has storage capacity that allows you to continue generating even after the sun has gone down. So that particular view, we think that that's a view that we can challenge.
Can we drive an industrial revolution in South and Southern Africa on renewables?
Well, I don't particularly, and as a company, we don't particularly believe that the country needs to purely use renewable energy. You need a mix. You need a mix. You need, for example, gas. Okay, gas.
Do you believe in that mix, nuclear energy to be in
yes,
that mix?
The reason
as
why
well?
we need a mix is, for example, if you take solar PV and wind right now, the costs are around 62 rand per kilowatt hour. Coal and other sources are unable to compete with that. So if we can generate electricity at 62 cents per kilowatt hour during the day, then why not? But if solar PV and wind, for example, is no longer able to generate after hours, then bring in a technology such as gas. So we're very excited about the new program, which is the LNG, the liquefied natural gas to power program that has been implemented by the Department of Energy. That program is supposed to start fairly soon. So we think that's where the different technologies start to work. But as I've already indicated, we have a technology like concentrated solar power that allows you to generate electricity for 24 hours a day as well. And it's renewable, and it's from a free source like the sun.
Now talk about the concentrated solar power plants. So you're talking about the Katu plant. That's Tell us a little bit about. You got 30 seconds to give us a quick update.
We've just launched that project. We've started construction, and it's 100 megawatts, which is equivalent to about 150,000 households. We'll be completing the plant at the end of 2018. We'll then connect onto the grid, onto Eskom's grid, and we'll be able to supply renewable energy from that plant.
Fantastic. That's the good news. Balance. That's the key. That's what, well, from the horse's mouth. I don't mean to call you a horse. Thank you for joining us. That is the Regional Managing Director, Siyabonga Mbanjwa from SENA, talking to us about renewable energy and how do we prop up the grid in order to, well, use all of the facilities we have at our disposal to drive what we hope will be an industrial revolution of some sort in the decades to come in South Africa. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, of course, we've been asking you a question of the day. We've been running a poll. Let's take a look at some of the tweets that you're sending in to us. This is a live interactive show, so send it to us in real time. We try and put it up in real time. Unati says, the Newsroom Eskom operation, Kanyisa must deal with this illegal electricity every day. They are causing deaths in the communities. Yes, he's talking about electricity theft. Zenyo, then Thomas Serabela. He says, yes, electricity is in Yoka. Have to get at least 7 years in prison, not a life sentence, please. I'm glad to see there's some empathy from Thomas. Only 7 years, not life. Ikonanato says, illegal electricity. Government should start by providing electricity to each and every household as it is stipulated in the Bill of Rights. We are working on that program here in South Africa, no doubt about that. Now, of course, it's, well, traditionally it used to be tea time. It's now the dinner break that we're having down in Adelaide, South Africa. 165 for 7 under the pump. This is the third test match, the first ever day-night test match that South Africa has taken part in. It's happening at the Adelaide Oval in South Australia. Very good morning to Kendall Mahamati, who's been watching a little bit of the cricket.
Oh, yeah.
It hasn't been plain sailing for the Proteas,
No,
has
not
it?
the kind of breakfast we're all hoping to have. I mean, we thought that the Proteas would be able to hang in there, hang tough, so to speak. Because initially it would seem like Stephen Cook would carry on with his batting, and he got out. And before we knew it, Bavuma was out, and then Quinton de Kock was out, and 165 for 7. It's a pretty crazy score.
The man who's standing up for his country, though, is Faf du Plessis. He's in the 60s, unbeaten, I think, or 60s
100%.
unbeaten right now. He's also been the guy who's all the focus been on for the last week or so with the ball tampering issues and the like going on. It's nice to see that the South African captain has kind of used that as motivation to push himself forward.
You know, this is the kind of captain that South Africa's been needing for a long time. He's putting sweets in he's putting some sweets into the Australians' mouths and stuff like that. You know, we've got some live cricket that actually is available to us to see.
Okay, there's some of the wickets.
Oh, those are the wickets being taken. There we go.
Yeah,
so
some of the wickets have been going down thick and fast. JP Duminy was third one down, inside edge. caught behind.
All edges, hey? That's very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. It means that when we bowl, and remember we've got a great bowling attack, when we bowl there'll be a little bit of assistance. I expect it to be tough for the Aussies as well. The last time they played a day-night test in South Australia at the Adelaide ground against New Zealand last year, it was a low-scoring affair. Around 200 was about par.
Exactly that, yeah. So it means that we're also looking, once again, looking for twilight, for dusk, to see what happens with whether the batsman can pick up the ball or not. And let's see what happens then. But, you know, we've got...
This was the big wicket. This was the big wicket we're looking at right now. Quinton de Kock caught behind. Great delivery there from Josh Hazelwood.
I'll tell you what, up until then, Quinton de Kock had been swashbuckling. He'd been going all out. He was attacking them as he does. And even the commentators were saying he seems a little bit overconfident. And unfortunately, commentators cursed. That's exactly when they took his wicket.
Kendall, thank you for that update. Kendall will be back at the top of the hour with me shortly, that is, and also at 10:40 with a complete update. Let's hope that the Proteas can get up to 200 and bowl them out quickly. We'll be back.
Assumed U.S. drone strike in the south of the country has killed 3 Al-Qaeda suspects.
Death toll in Yemen's 18-month-old civil war now stands at about 10,000.
People get killed or die and are actually buried before they're recorded. And we don't have a way of recording that, but we know the numbers are much higher.
Water restrictions are to be imposed on villages in and around the Nkomazi municipality.
Pumps can't pump the water because there's no water in a river. And if the water is coming back, then it's full of mud.
Those who can pray and those who can do any miracle to make sure that we've got enough rain, give it a try.
David brought back black and white photography to life through the Zanzibar exhibition.
I'm a fanatic for tones, and I love the kind of tones and gradients and the greys, and you know, it never bores me.
We're representing South Africa. I mean, we're flying the flag there, so it's a beautiful thing for us.
The dance floor is always lit when DJ Black Coffee hits the decks. He was praised for his appearance at this year's Coachella Music Festival in California. And he recently bagged the International Achievement Award at the 2016 Summers. Catch trends for that 1-hour weekly dose of arts and entertainment news every Saturday from 12 to 1.
What was, the week like in terms of CITES?
I saw there was a news insert about there being genetically engineered sort of rhino horns that have been introduced now. And then that has sort of now been rejected. They're saying that it's sort of going to promote poaching as per se.
The concern that's been raised by law enforcement in that particular regard has been that how do you distinguish between the original and the fake?
Yes.
Because it's going to make it difficult to police.
The rhino horn is the same quality as the nail. If you want something from the rhino horn, just cut your nail and do whatever. What was most striking for me was how the pangolin came into the picture. And that was interesting for me because a few years ago in Zimbabwe, if you found a pangolin and you handed it over, you would have an audience with the president.
Wow.
Yeah, and you would be given a certain amount of money. And once that program started, almost every week there was somebody who was getting an audience with the president.
We make sure to be where news is happening,
both locally and globally.
For the latest business news, stay with us.
From South Africa to the world, we've got all your latest sporting news.
Don't miss our weather updates every hour.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday, from 3 to 5:30 p.m. here on SABC News.
myself will be with you for the next hour or so here on the Newsroom show. Of course, we've been running a poll because we've got some interesting court cases today.
100%.
We've been asking the viewers, should MPA head
Sean Abrams
does
he deserve a suspension?
Well, let's have a look at
That's
what
our
people
question.
are saying to this.
Our question for the day, should NPA head Sean Abrams be suspended? And we've got 146 votes now, up from the previous hour where 82% say yes, a slight increase on what it was said in the previous hour, and 18% say no, he shouldn't be suspended.
That's our poll. Keep on contributing. Now, this is some of the contributions on that. Muli Malong says, let's rather subject Sean Abrams to a fair process, citing good reason why we call for his suspension. Wonderful tweet there, Muli. Very, very open. Smart tweet.
Yeah, and Unate Grootboom, a regular contributor to SABC Newsroom, I think Sean Abrams scored an own goal, so suspension will do just fine for the nation.
That's
from the heart there.
Rangwane Marumo brings it home. He says, if he's suspended, it will be with full pay. Yep,
that is
there
true.
we have it. That's what's on our poll right now. Of course, we've also asked you a question with regards to illegal electricity connections. And is this economic sabotage? What do you think? Is it economic sabotage? And should those go to jail for longer? Should we send them to jail for longer periods to make an example and come to terms with this? At SABC Newsroom is where you can send us your tweets with regards to that. But let's now go and take a look at your top stories at this hour. The Helen Suzman Foundation and Freedom Under Law's court application to compel President Jacob Zuma to suspend NPA head Sean Abrahams and 2 other officials is expected to be heard shortly. The Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is expected to announce its final interest rate decision for the year a little bit later today. Then lawyers representing Claudi Mutsuneng and the SABC are expected to submit arguments opposing the DA's application to remove the Group Executive for Corporate Affairs, Claudi Mutsuneng, from his position. Well, those are the top stories right now. Let's go to Kendall for our sports update.
Evan, thanks very much. You know what, it's not the kind of update I was hoping to be able to be giving everybody this morning, but good morning to you. This is what's happening in the sports right now. Captain Faf du Plessis resists the Aussies as the hosts put the Proteas under pressure, taking early wickets.
Yeah, very good. 3 points, 3 goals. Could have been more, but yeah, we're happy. Before I continue, because I know I'll forget, I'm asking everybody to vote for Kekana. Africa must vote for Kekana.
Coach Peter Musumane puts in a good word for his captain Hlompo Kekana for the 2016 Pushkash Award as the Mamelodi Sundowns thump Arrows by 3-0. And in the UEFA Champions League, Lionel Messi fires group-topping Barcelona into the next round as his brace destroys the brave but helpless Celtic.
Through to Messi, delicious ball, brilliant finish, Lionel Messi again.
All this and more I've got for you later on the sports bulletin about 10:40 or so. For now, it is back to Evan, who's got the news.
Thank you very much, Kendall. Now, we've got proceedings underway in the Western Cape High Court, where lawyers representing Claudi Mutsuneng is expected to submit arguments for the Group Executive for Corporate Affairs at the SABC not to be fired. Let's go there live.
With what we say, the answer is there. 3 things must now happen, given the further developments that have taken place, even in this court over the last few days and yesterday. The ad hoc portfolio committee will conduct its inquiry. If the review succeeds, which apparently it will, given what the SABC stance is, a new disciplinary inquiry has to be held, and the review of the Public Protector's report must be finalised. Those are the things that must happen. And what we have in this application is the DA trying again what it did not succeed in obtaining from Justice Davis. Can I ask you, Lord, to perhaps look at page 37 of our heads? It's perhaps just easier to go there than to the whole of the judgment. In paragraph 102 of our heads,
Paragraph 100.
Paragraph 102, that's page 37 of the heads. The bottom of page 37, paragraph 102, and what I seek to direct the Lord's attention to are the two paragraphs quoted there from the Davis judgment, paragraph 52 and 53 of that judgment. The essence thereof is, and perhaps it's more prudent to simply go directly to paragraph 53. Much has been made by the respondents of Mr. Motsoeneng's achievements at the SABC and his unique ability to be the COO of the SABC. If it is properly shown that none of the allegations made against him are sustainable, it would be unfair and hence premature at this stage to preclude him from such consideration, because in the previous paragraph the point was made that there's nothing that stops him from actually reapplying for that position. His Lordship continues, in summary, it is preferable to allow the relevant disciplinary proceedings to run its course and to reflect these findings in the order. And then he pointed out that he agreed with Mr. Manechi that that is the prudent course of action. So already at that stage, the DA sought an order that the SABC had to appoint a new COO within 60 days. Fill that post before the disciplinary inquiry had taken its course, was the effective point. And Justice Davis said, you are jumping the gun. That process must take its course. That is what the public protector said must happen. And it must be complied with.
Yeah, can I ask you this? Now, pending the review application that's in the Gauteng High Court,
yes,
and pending the disciplinary hearing, what must happen with Mr. Motsoeneng, according to you?
He should remain where he is. There is no basis to terminate his employment pending the outcome of those proceedings. And that is essentially what the DA wants.
But that could be, that's a different question from saying that he can occupy a senior executive post. One might say that nothing has happened to date which entitles one to say that he is not he's not entitled to his employment benefits.
Yes.
But the question is, should he continue to occupy a senior executive post while the public protector's findings stand?
Lords, perhaps I can answer it in this fashion. There are two elements, and I think it's the essence of what you are putting to us. He's an employee, and that relationship, we submit, must continue, because there's no basis to terminate his employment when that is the very type of thing that the new disciplinary inquiry has to engage in. It effectively prejudges the outcome of those proceedings, and it effectively makes it lip service to have that inquiry, which is a requirement in terms of the public protector's report.
Well, let us assume for purposes of your further submissions this morning that Mr. Motsoeneng's employment relationship hasn't been terminated and that this court won't terminate it. I'm not saying that's going to be the decision, but I think to focus on the points that trouble us, it would be better to assume that he, until something more happens, is entitled to receive his employment benefits.
Yes. So, my Lord, then we say the answer must really come from the SABC, of course, because that made the decision to appoint him. But as far as Mr. Motsoeneng is concerned, you must keep in mind that the decision to keep him in the current position as a general executive is a decision that the SABC had to take in the context of conflicting requirements placed on the SABC. There's the requirement...
Sorry to interrupt you, but can't that be a rational decision having regard to the Public Protector's report that's still standing?
That is the point I seek you to address, my Lord. So if my Lord will allow me to explain what we say about that. The SABC has to, at this stage, pending finalisation of these issues, consider various obligations it has. It has obligations to fulfil its mandate in terms of the Broadcasting Act. It has its obligations to comply with the Public Protector's report. And it also has its obligations as employer in terms of the Labour Relations Act and other statutes. So the confluence of these various requirements, it has to balance. And it has to balance it pending the final determination of the matter, by virtue of the outcome of the new disciplinary inquiry and the review of the Public Protector's report. So to the extent that it then decides internally, this is where we will utilise Mr. Motsoeneng. It can't be said to be irrational, because we must keep in mind that it is a matter of exercising a particular power, and I use the word in perhaps a bit of a loose sense, to utilise means to obtain its results. So, if one has regard to what that aim is, that result is, it is not irrational to say, well, we keep Mr. Motsoeneng in a position where he can be of use, but where he does not rule the roost.
That's not strictly, at least, how the SABC now explains its decision. It doesn't say that we balanced various factors, that we knew for the moment Mr. Motsoeneng was tainted by these findings which haven't been set aside, but on the other side we're going to have to pay him a lot of money, so let's rather use his skills as best we can. They say the effect of the final SEA's dismissal of the appeal against Davis J's judgment was that Mr. Motsoeneng automatically occupied this position. Now that's something that Mr. Du Toit will argue in due course, presumably. But the SABC doesn't advance this balancing exercise which you talk about. And, but in any event, putting it that way, the question is it rational? We have many instances, unfortunately. One might say, rather, if a judicial officer behaves in a certain way, and there have been recent examples, do we say, well, rather than not utilise their judicial services, we will have such a person continue to serve on the bench while these allegations are unresolved? The answer is, unfortunately, we do not want that. And the fact that one has to pay a lot of money for a long time is an indictment of how poorly disciplinary processes are run. It's not because the solution is wrong.
Yes.
Can I just add to what my learned brother said? So the issue comes down to the fact that such a person remains suspended pending resolving all the outstanding issues.
Well, let me perhaps just go back one step. It remains for the SABC to explain that decision, because it's not a decision made by Mr. Motsoeneng. So what we are simply saying is, it is not merely irrational for the sake of having been made. It's not as simple as saying, well, he's in that position, that's irrational in the circumstances. What we are saying is there's a bigger pot to consider.
Yes, but in considering that bigger pot, you see the issues here, some serious adverse findings been made by the Public Protector against your client.
Quite correct. What we are saying is simply this. That's not the only factor. And a decision to utilise him in a particular capacity, whether that's because he reverts to that position or whether he's newly appointed in that position, doesn't really take away from this point.
In fact, if the SABC had had its way, the way they would have utilised him was to continue acting as its chief operating officer. It was only the minister who said no.
Well, that seems to be the case. But of course, again, that is not a decision by Mr. Motsoeneng. But it does show that they want to utilise his skills. So the only submission we're making on this point is this. It may be that it is thought that there are better decisions to be made. But that, of course, is not the test. It is whether the decision that was made is one that is in that pot to be considered. And what we are saying is it was one and therefore it can't be said to be irrational. That is the simple point that we advance on that aspect.
Mr. Bester, sorry. For some reason I had Barlow in mind, but he featured somewhere in the ancient history of this case. I'd meant to raise it with my colleague before we came into court, but can I just throw out this idea, and it goes back to the delay in resolving what everybody now seems to accept will be a new disciplinary process. We don't have a core at board, and the public protector's remedial action was directed at the board's appointing a disciplinary chair and prosecutor.
Yes.
Just occurred to me that a resolution might be for the interested parties, which I would take to be the SABC, your client, and the public protector. I'm not sure the DA should necessarily be involved in this. If they between themselves could agree on the identity of a suitable chairperson and prosecutor, and then the public protector who previously recommended something else might consent to the court directing the appointment of a particular chairperson and prosecutor, so that the process doesn't have to be delayed while the board is reconstituted. I don't expect you to answer it.
Of course, we will take instructions. I do agree that there is no good reason for the DA to be involved in that process. It comes here on behalf of the public.
The minister's turn in council might also have had a say into that.
That's correct. It's rather the minister than the DA who may have been involved in that.
That's why we exclude the DA.
No, of course. I'm simply agreeing with the bench, as it pleases the board. If Mills will just allow it, seems that I have instructions.
Of course.
Thank you. My apologies. Lords, thank you for that. We will just have to take instructions from our client and advise him appropriately. It's not so easy to do it.
We accept that.
We will do that a bit later if you will allow us. Lords, if I can then go back to where we were. We have a situation where the relief being sought here seeks effectively, and this is where we left off before we started this in-between debate, where this application effectively seeks to preempt the outcome of the review as well as the disciplinary proceedings. It also is a second bite at the cherry because, His Lordship Mr. Justice Davis said, wait for the disciplinary hearing, wait for the outcome thereof. Now the DA comes to court and say, no, well, we're not willing to wait. We successfully review the disciplinary inquiry, but we're not willing to wait for the outcome thereof. We want this court to now effectively make a decision that will bind that disciplinary inquiry. Make it lip service to the public protector's steps that she stated must take place in the report. But the DA now seeks to go further than that. And that is what Prayer 1 is all about. Not only do they want to revisit Justice Davis's indication that they should wait for the outcome of the disciplinary inquiry, they say, well, also for other positions. It's a necessary consequence of the factual findings of the public protector, that it can't be in any other position. Now,
Mr. Bester, can I ask you this on that score regarding to the review application? Absent the DA's complaint regarding the review application, the situation would have been de facto and de jure that Mr. Motsoeneng would have been discharged or he would have been found guilty of all the complaints against him. Is it correct?
Well, my Lord, we're not so sure at this stage that we can commit to an answer to that. It's not an issue before my Lords. And we've heard the public protector's interpretation of what should happen there, which differs slightly from what we've previously understood to be the situation.
Can I ask my question again to you?
Yes, Lord.
Absent the DA's complaint, the review proceedings, in terms of the inquiry that took place, that outcome would have stand.
Oh, I apologize, I misunderstood. Yes.
Now the DA comes to court and complain about it. And now it appears everyone else that was involved in the disciplinary inquiries now says, oops, yeah, there was a mess up. He didn't comply fully with the principle of legality, and therefore we agree it should be set aside.
Well, of course, it's not everybody in the true sense, in the sense that Mr. Motsoeneng simply says, well, it's not my inquiry to organise and to run and to arrange.
Well, the SABC board comes to court and says, listen here,
yes,
we didn't comply with all that was required from us.
Quite correct.
And it appears that the minister also to some extent, no, sorry, I apologise.
Well, Lord, yes, the SABC comes to court and say, we now agree that those proceedings were not correct, and therefore, essentially, they concede to the review, as we understand it. And that's the status there. So they will, from the perspective that we have, it seems that it's unavoidable that there will be a new review. But of course, at the time, the way to deal with the Public Protector's report was understood in a certain manner. And the fact that that subsequently turned out to potentially be wrong doesn't change the fact that it happened. It doesn't per se mean that everyone involved had mala fide motives. It also certainly does not mean that Mr. Motsoeneng had a hand in it. He was simply the employee.
Well, according to the argument put up by the DA, they say that if you have regard to the people that's on the board, the 9, that took the decision, who should be the initiator, who should be appointed, Mr. Motsoeneng's name appear on that list.
But with all due respect, it's denied, and that is an inference, and we know the test for inference. It is not the most probable inference. My apologies. Yes. And it must be seen in this context. He was on special leave at the time. On the facts known to the court, the better inference, the more plausible and probable inference, is that he did not participate and that it is simply a mistake on the document.
So then the board was incorrect.
We have to accept that. But again, Mr. Motsoeneng was not there. He didn't participate in that. It can't be laid at his feet. Okay. And that may very well be part of the reason, we will wait for Mr. De Tooy, why the concession had been made regarding the review of the disciplinary inquiry.
You see, the only point that is being made, it appears that the DA is being said that they come to court unnecessary. They come to court with matters that should be dealt with outside. But here with the review application, it appears, on what we've got in front of us now, their complaint is a result that very disciplinary hearing is now being set aside. And it appears the employer of Mr. Motsoeneng comes to court and say, mea culpa,
yes,
we made a mistake.
Quite correct, Lord. But of course, it doesn't mean because the DA is correct in one application, it must be correct in another application.
No, that's accepted.
But what we do know is that the board, subject to Mr. De Tooy's argument that everything happened by operation of law and that there wasn't actually a decision to appoint your client to the current post, your client, assuming there was a decision, made its decision to appoint Mr. Motsoeneng to the latest position and to reshuffle Ms. Togwana, knowing, already taking the view that the disciplinary inquiry was not proper compliance with the Public Protector's order, because they had already taken that view and instituted the Gauteng proceedings.
Yes, we'll have to wait for Mr. De Tooy, but on the face of it, it seems to be correct with little bits to be yes. But what we are saying, we're not attacking that process, because I explained yesterday that Mr. Motsoeneng does not take issue with that. He stayed out of that, apart from putting up facts explaining why he feels prejudiced. But what we are saying is, as a consequence thereof, the relief sought in the second application before the Lords should not be granted, because it preempts the outcome of what must now be the new, properly done disciplinary inquiry.
Yet I'm sure neither you nor I want to keep on repeating questions and submissions, but I'm not sure yet I have an answer as to why assuming in 3 months' time there is a new disciplinary outcome which clears Mr. Motsoeneng properly of all charges, do you say that that will render rational the decision that was made in September?
No, we're not saying that.
But then why should we wait for that outcome or any other outcome? If it's an historical fact, it was either a good decision when it was made or it wasn't.
We are concerned principally when we make that submission with Prayer 1 of the notice of motion. Prayer 2, the setting aside of the September decision, is principally something that the SABC must explain. And we only made the earlier submission regarding the balancing and that it is not an irrational decision in the context. And I don't want to repeat that.
But assuming we don't agree with the width of Prayer 1 in the notice of motion, if your client, it seems, cannot properly be appointed an acting COO, it is said he doesn't have the skills to be the Group Executive of Human Resources, I think was a potential opening for him, and if his appointment in Corporate Affairs is set aside, realistically, there isn't going to be another senior executive position for him to occupy until either the Public Protector Review succeeds or the new disciplinary inquiry clears him. I appreciate it's a matter of you don't want the order even if it's not of practical effect, but am I right that it is unlikely to be of practical effect if Prayer 2 is granted?
Probably yes. But what we are saying is Prayer 1 asks very different relief. Apart from this, and perhaps I should just point it out, perhaps it's appropriate to at this point just ask to have regard to the wording of Prayer 2. And you can also find that at page 3 of the papers. Because there are actually two parts to Prayer 2.1. And the first part actually repeats Prayer 1. Because the first part says, it is declared that the decision to employ him at all. So that's really a repetition. So if we talk about our submissions regarding Prayer 2, it's really about that part, the particular appointment in that particular position. Because the first part we say shouldn't be part of Prayer 2 at all. It's a repetition of 1.
Oh, that's right. I can see that.
So if we then just focus on Prayer 1 for the moment, because that's really where the balance of our submissions go. The DA wants a declarator that the court, that Mr. Motsoeneng may not be employed by the SABC at all. It therefore seeks to terminate his employment relationship. That's what they ask. Whether or not he should continue as an employee is something that will be decided in the disciplinary hearing. So it can't be circumvented that this relief seeks to preempt the outcome of the disciplinary inquiry. This is not about what position he deals with in the interim. This is not an application for his suspension pending the outcome, to take him out of the fray or anything of that kind. That's not the case we have been brought to court to answer. The case we've been brought to court to answer is a declarative that Mr. Motsoeneng cannot be employed by the SABC.
No, but that's not entirely correct. Read it. It says here, unless and until all the negative findings against the first respondent in the report of the fifth respondent, being the public protector, are reviewed and set aside by a court.
With respect, my Lord, it makes no difference. If his employment is terminated, it's terminated.
I think we do, though, have your submission on the point that nothing that's happened in law to date has terminated the employment, and that it wouldn't be appropriate at this stage to, as it were, declare that he isn't an employer and can't be an employee.
Well, my Lord, there's nothing further to Prayer 1 then, with respect.
That may be. It's not the whole case, but it's. But either way, I think we have the your submissions on this point, and it's probably, if I may respectfully say, not the DA's strongest point, this relief, prayer one. The idea that they can't have him at all. If by that you mean that they can't recognise him as still being an employee and recognising his employment benefits. For the rest, it seems to be not of practical significance, because if his appointment as the Corporate Affairs Executive is set aside, there doesn't appear to be any other position into which he could plausibly be placed, pending the finalisation of the review or the disciplinary proceedings. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily have to say that, but it just doesn't appear to be a live issue.
Yes, that's not an issue that is to be found. And whether or not that is the implication is not really the issue before this court and ought not to be determined, I suspect. The way in which the SABC deals with Mr. Motsoeneng in the event of this court setting aside the September 2016 decision is not what has to be decided here. But it creates a difficulty if that's done in the context of what is asked for in prayer one. But if that appointment to a particular post is set aside, then he remains an employee. And then the SABC must make decisions as to how to utilise or not utilise him until the outcome of the disciplinary inquiry.
Well, that's why it was alluded earlier that in certain circumstances, persons are being suspended with full benefits pending the outcome of the inquiry.
Of course, that is so.
I mean, to give an extreme example, one might say, well, there'd be no harm in Mr. Motsoeneng being services being utilised as a cleaner pending the outcome of the review or disciplinary proceedings. But that would be demeaning to Mr. Motsoeneng, and it's not going to happen.
Yes.
So we're talking about his occupying senior executive positions.
We are, but the important thing for us is that it is recognised that he is still an employee of the SABC. That can't simply be terminated. That is the real issue.
Can I just mention something, and it's a point I'll for Mr. Du Toit also to think about. It's not directly raised on the papers, but I think Mr. Aguma says that once you get to these high, I think the general executive positions, they're 5-year contracts. And we have Mr. Motsoeneng's current contract following the latest appointment.
Yes.
If the position is that by setting aside the appointment as COO, he simply reverted to his previous position, and I think the evidence is that the current corporate affairs position is simply a renamed version of a job he previously held.
That's good.
Well, he was appointed to that position in April 2011. And if that was a 5-year contract, didn't it expire in April 2016? And these contracts say there's no expectation of renewal. I raise it for consideration because it appears that once you, as it were, take on the high-profile jobs with the big money, that comes with it the idea it's a fixed-term contract and you have no right and no expectation to re-employment.
That is correct. We accept that's the
so
principle.
If there was no valid decision after the decision to appoint him to what was then called, well, let's just call it the corporate affairs position, it had a different name, in April 2011, it seems to be a misconception to say that, it may be a misconception to say that he was still an employee if that argument is that he just reverts to his previous post.
No, my Lord's with respect, he remains an employee. The fact that he's appointed to the one or the other position doesn't change the fact that he remains an employee.
Yes, but on the SABC's papers advance, it is when, as my learned colleague just indicated, you get employed for the fixed period of 5 years. There's no guarantee of re-employment. So, if the argument holds that he remains an employee, he would revert to his old position, which was a fixed 5-year period, which would have expired in April of this year.
It may be something not sufficiently canvassed on the papers because I don't think we have in these papers, I haven't seen it, the April 2011 contract. But it may be something that, if it can't be considered on these papers does need to be investigated, because the SABC may be acting under a misconception.
Yes, my Lord. Can I just take instruction before I make my two submissions?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Firstly, with respect, we agree that issue is not canvassed on the papers. And it is extremely prejudicial for Mr. Hussein to be faced with this beyond halfway through the hearing, where the matter has not actually been canvassed at all on the papers. But secondly, assuming it would have expired in April, he continued. And that by itself, as a matter of contract law, keeps him an employee.
But what he continued as was COO.
Well, but he continued as an employee. Because we can't have half the one argument and not the other half. Because if we say he reverts to that, he remains an employee, and they keep him beyond April, whether they're incorrect about the position or not. The fact is he has continuous employment with the SABC. So then we would submit, and the issue has not been canvassed. It is not as simple as to say, well, it is terminated, because it really creates a different set of facts to consider as an academic aspect almost, because it does not accord with reality. One must keep in mind the facts of how things actually unfolded before one considers what should be the status of that question.
But let me bring you back to the point that you've raised earlier. Do I understand you correctly that the point that you're pressing is, in terms of Prayer 1, what the relief the DA is seeking presently is that he may not hold any position at all? Yes. Which essentially means that if this relief is granted as it stands here, it effectively terminates the employee-employer relationship that's presently in existence.
That's the essence of the point, yes. And that principally for two reasons. The one is it prejudges the outcome of the disciplinary. The other is it deals with his employment summarily without any consideration of his labour rights. And that's where the arguments in terms of Section 23 and to some extent Section 22 of the Constitution come in. And then we must consider whether Section 36, the test in Section 36, has been complied with. And then we must consider what is the law of general application that the DA contends is reasonably and justifiably limiting these rights.
Mr. Bester, with an eye on the time,
yes, I
think you continuing to fight a fight which you may in any event succeed on. I don't want to cut you short unnecessarily.
Of course.
And obviously we haven't decided any issue. But
of course, thank you. Then,
but your point has been made and it's been noted.
Thank you. Then let me just make sure what we can then skip, because we have only a few things to look at. Yes. If I take
yes, man.
Thank you, Lord. Just briefly, and perhaps just to tie up a few aspects. There is a conditional application to stay. The basis of that is simply that in the circumstances now, to grant this relief in Prayer 1, and it ties closely to the previous points that the Lord said we need not belabor, so I will be brief, just so that it's still in the mix. We say it's inappropriate to grant this type of relief at this stage, where it effectively preempts the outcome of other processes. And that is the purpose. So if the Lords do not find that the DA cannot at this stage succeed with that relief, then as a fallback we say, well, then at the very best it is something that must be determined later, after the outcome of the disciplinary and the review of the public protector. But I don't need to re-argue the point. We will still simply stand by that. Briefly, because it might tie in with the issue of cost, there is a strikeout application. The only real point taken in respect of that notice is Mr. Motsoeneng did not specify the details of which specific allegation he seeks to strike out in terms of which one of the various reasons why it can be struck out. Of course, that comes from the DA who complained that service is a technical point. Yet they opposed that notice by saying, well, you actually haven't dotted the I's and crossed the T's within the time constraints. We do not want to waste this court's time with going through that process. It serves no purpose. What we do say is that the notice is well founded on the papers we submit, and that should be taken into account, if only in respect of the issue of costs. And lastly, then, if I can deal a bit more with the cost issue. We say that we've dealt with the cost in the review, so we're only dealing with the cost in the main application. Factors that must be taken into account in this instance is those initial aspects that we've raised regarding getting this matter before court, so that even if this court entertains the matter ultimately, those should weigh heavily in the court's mind when it comes to the cost of the application. And similarly, when we look at the strikeout and stay application. And so what we are saying, Lord, in conclusion, prayer 1 should not be granted. Prayer 2, we say, should also not be granted, but we've made limited submissions in that regard, and we'll leave the rest to Mr. Motsoeneng. Overall, we submit that Mr. Motsoeneng should not pay the cost of this application, even if the laws grant some or the other of that relief. Of course, in respect of the rest, it must be clear that that is not relief that he has a hand in, and that where he should be bumped with the costs. So it's really those two that are relevant. And we submit with respect that these factors should weigh heavily against any cost order to be paid by Mr. Motsoeneng, irrespective of the outcome of the application. It will also allow me.
Yes, you may take instructions from your junior.
Lord, perhaps just to finalise the point, goes to the cost issue, the strikeout issue. It really is inappropriate, where the case is built around factual findings that can simply be stated, and stated in the terms of the public protector, to then embellish and call Mr. Motsoeneng a Nazi. The greatest of respect, it is very offensive to be called a Nazi with all that goes around that. To, in the South African context, call a black man a Nazi is quite frankly something that this court should specifically and firmly address. Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Mr. Bester. Mr. Du Toit.
Lord, this case has taken a significant change. The complex of this case has undergone a significant change in the course of yesterday. That significant change is the concession by the public protector that a disciplinary inquiry or disciplinary hearing can come to different conclusions than arrived at by the public protector. Now, if that is the case, then the disciplinary inquiry should be held, and the results may differ from what the public protector has found. But of course, that's not the case that we came to meet here. The case we came to meet here departed from the basis that the findings of the public protector were written in stone. That is clear from the attitude of the Democratic Alliance, as expressed in its papers, and also clear from the attitude expressed by the Public Protector herself in her affidavits.
Well, I read through the affidavit to see whether, in fact, Mr. Labuschagne was adopting a position contrary to the Public Protector, and I don't think she, in fact, ever said that the disciplinary inquiry can't inquire into the merits and reach different findings. What she said was that the SABC could not conduct a parallel process with a view to finding contrary facts.
She said that as well, yes.
But she didn't. I had rather understood that, perhaps because the DA said it, that she meant that in the way the DA understood it. But it's not clear that she did.
Well, my lord, perhaps we should look at the papers.
In which of the two applications?
Well, why don't we look at the one in this application, what is called the main application? I invite you, my lord, to look at page, I think it's 979. Paragraph 8. Last sentence. The binding effect of findings made by the Public Protector, considered separately from remedial action, is particularly relevant in this matter. Then page 980. 980, my lord. Oh, sorry, I seem to have two sets of numbering. Yes, it is 980, paragraph 10.3.
Yes.
It is 980, is it?
Yeah, I've got it.
Yes, thank you, my lord. When remedial action is binding, compliance by the organ of state with such remedial act is not optional, whatever reservations the effective organ of state might have about its fairness, appropriateness, or lawfulness. It is not open to the SABC, the board, and the minister to pick and choose which of the findings, and I stress the word findings, and remedial action they will disregard. The next page, paragraph 11, the second sentence. However, such a process may not constitute a parallel investigative process to second guess and replace the findings and or remedial action. Next sentence. The purpose of such investigations will be to determine whether the findings and or remedial action will be challenged in a court process or not. Now, there's no difference in the view, obviously, in the light of the Nkandla judgment, that the findings can be set aside by a court in a review. But here, she has never conceded previously that the findings could be dealt with by a disciplinary inquiry. Now, she's been compelled to...
Well, I think your client itself initially interpreted the report as necessarily entailing that the disciplinary inquiry could, as employment inquiries do, go into the merits and sanction.
Yes.
So it wasn't self-evident from the report that the findings couldn't be departed from by a disciplinary inquiry. The SABC itself couldn't say, well, we're not going to comply with the remedial action because our parallel process establishes that Mr. Motsoeneng has done no wrong. But that's a different matter.
We're talking about your lordship's point that the findings, her findings of fact, could not be differed from by a disciplinary inquiry.
Yes, now what she is here saying is what the SABC can decide, not what a disciplinary inquiry can decide.
Yes, here. But nevertheless, in the context of this affidavit, it is quite clear that she regards her findings as final.
But then what would be the point of directing that remedial action in the form of a disciplinary inquiry, unless it was clear that she said...
That is one of the dilemmas which the SABC faced and which we've dealt with in our heads of argument.
Well, it's a dilemma which arises on the interpretation that the disciplinary inquiry has to accept the factual findings. And,
yes.
and that presumably is one of your points in the Gauteng review.
Yes, I am not briefed in the Gauteng review, so I can't speak for that. What I find interesting is that both my colleagues in the Gauteng review and my distinguished juniors in this matter and I all misunderstood what the meaning of the protector's affidavit was. Apparently we were misled by something, but I'm not sure what. Can I refer you to paragraph 12? Insofar as the findings themselves are concerned, they stand unless and until reviewed. It's quite clear.
But Mr. Du Toit, if you have regard to paragraph 24, it also appears that what the public protector is saying is that the remedial action taken contemplated a fair and lawful disciplinary hearing. So when the disciplinary hearing hears the matter, it must still be a lawful and a fair hearing. Now, in having a fair hearing, surely whatever the findings that were made, to some extent, can be revisited by Mr. Motsoeneng, and he can put up evidence to show to the contrary.
Yes.
It must be in order to be fair.
I think the Lord must go back. What did the public protector say? She said appropriate disciplinary action.
Yes.
That has been interpreted by her in her affidavits, and also by her predecessor, if I may say so, as being a departure, as dealing with sanction only, not dealing with merits.
Well,
and that is the dilemma which faced the SABC.
Well, the question is whether that's ever been explicit. I must say that I was, if we can put it this way, misled in the same way that you and others were. But which is why
for himself.
I'm speaking for myself. Which is why, in the light of what Mr. Labuschagne said, I went back to examine the affidavits, and I see it's not as clear as I thought. But I don't say that the way you've understood it is not how one might fairly have understood it.
Well, if one starts with the judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal, which does say that the findings stand unless set aside in a review, and you have regard to what the Democratic Alliance says in their papers, and then you read what the Public Protector has said in her papers, the conclusion that the disciplinary action which was required dealt only with sanction and not with merits. It couldn't inquire into whether, in fact, Mr. Motsoeneng did or did not do what he said to have done. It dealt only with sanction. And that's the way, quite frankly, it's been interpreted till now. But we believe that the concession made by Mr. Labuschagne on behalf of the Public Protector is perfectly correct. It's correct because it then accommodates the Section 23 rights which Mr. Motsoeneng has. In other words, he's entitled to fair labour procedure. And that has been the dilemma. And that dilemma, in fact, Mr. Aguma refers to in his affidavit and also referred to in our heads of argument. We've had this problem. On the one hand, the Public Protector's findings are immutable, of fact. On the other hand, he's entitled to a fair hearing. How do you resolve that? A fair hearing cannot depart from a conclusion. In other words, you're guilty, now tell me what else you have to say. And that...
But having said that,
yes.
In saying that I came to a conclusion that you're guilty, but I give you a fair hearing to put up evidence, now you put up evidence and you show to the contrary. The suggestion here is that the chairperson of the disciplinary hearing can then make a finding on what's in front of him, but he cannot ignore the finding of the public protector. He's got a finding there, he's got new evidence here, and then he comes to a conclusion. And the conclusion is the disciplinary hearing's conclusion.
Yes. One would think that if one
Isn't
has
that
regard...
part of a fair hearing?
If one has regard to the Section 8, I think it's called, of the Labour Relations Act, the code which is annexed to the Labour Relations Act. Schedule 8. If one has regard to the disciplinary code which applies to the SABC, then you cannot start an inquiry, a disciplinary inquiry, with a finding of guilty, because then it's purposeless. And that is exactly what the DA wants. The DA wants the disciplinary inquiry to depart from the position that you're guilty. Now say something to us. Well, that we don't regard as fair, and we think that's a breach of his Section 23 rights, and that is, in our respectful submission, a irregularity in the public protector's report, because she's ignored the Section 23 rights.
Well, that assumes that she intended, or that on a proper interpretation of her report, the remedial action in terms of the holding of a disciplinary inquiry was to be a sanctions-only hearing. And I must say, having read both the affidavits successive public protectors have made in the first and second cases before us, it's not clear that she means that. She continually says the board can't second-guess my factual findings and, as it were, present watered-down charges. But her complaint, the way she associates herself with the DA, is not to say it's a sanctions-only hearing, but to say that because of its flawed approach to her findings, the SAB sabotaged the hearing by failing to pursue certain charges and failing to lead evidence. Now, she could only make those criticisms if it was permissible in terms of her report for evidence to be led on the charges.
My Lord, once again, can I refer you to her affidavit? Because I haven't ended my references to her reliance on findings.
Well, I was referring to her first affidavit because that is the one in which she was squarely dealing with the question of the disciplinary process rather than the appointment as corporate affairs executive. But it may be that the allegations are the same in both.
I'm going to come to the first affidavit in a moment, but can I deal with the second one, the one by the current public protector? In paragraph 13, she says, I set out the findings made, and it is the board and the minister failing properly to recognize such findings and give effect to such remedial action. And then paragraph 15. To date, neither the SABC nor its board has duly accepted the findings made and implemented the remedial action. Paragraph 16, the findings made against Mr. Moitsing are detailed in paragraph 10, and then she goes and sets out the findings. And then in paragraph 16.2, she says, Mr. Moitsing fraudulently misrepresented his qualifications by stating his application form that he completed matric, and he continued to perpetrate this fraud. He again repeated his misrepresentation. Now, apart from the fact that the public protector doesn't seem to understand the difference between a misrepresentation and a fraud and a dishonest filling in of a form, there's clear distinction. The representee in a fraud cannot complain if he knows the truth. And that is what Mr. Kloppers at the previous hearing said. I knew what his position was. So she doesn't distinguish about that, but that's one of her findings. So in other words, she envisages that the disciplinary inquiry should depart from the position that fraud was committed. The fact that he filled in the form wrongly is admitted, and he's apologized for that. And that brings me to a point. What is the point of disciplinary hearings? It's not only to arrive at a dismissal. There are many results that can flow from a disciplinary hearing and a disciplinary inquiry. The approach of the Labour Relations Act is, and has been confirmed in our courts in a judgment also by Judge Lecransi in the Natal Labour Court. I may not be you, my lord, but it's...
Definitely not me.
But, well, we share the same problem. Lord du Toit is much like Lecransi. There are many of them. But the aim is to reform and to discipline, and to cure is to make the employee better. So the outcome is not necessarily dismissal. But that is the result which the Democratic Alliance wants this court to arrive at, even before the disciplinary inquiry has been held. Can I refer you also to paragraph 16.3? The findings which are there, which are said to be indisputable. Paragraph 16.6, 16.7. And then in paragraph 17 at page 984, once again, he refers to the findings. What is also important, Lord, is to see what exactly the public protector wanted the disciplinary action to be. There were only 3 matters which he said had to be investigated, or not investigated, but dealt with, let me put it that way. One was the misrepresentation of his qualifications, and that's said in paragraph 20.2. The misrepresentation of his qualifications. Secondly, his appointment of Ms. Motsweni. And thirdly, the purging of senior staff. These are required disciplinary action.
But it,
not the rest.
She also mentioned abuse of power.
That's in relation to Ms. Motsweni. The abuse of power and improper conduct in the appointment and salary increments of Ms. Motsweni.
Mr. du Toit, I presume you will accept that the SABC can't approach this, or the board can't approach this, on the basis that we are going to do the bare minimum. And if we see that there are serious findings against Mr. Motsoeneng, but for some reason they haven't been captured in what she says the disciplinary action should approach, we will ignore them. That wouldn't be bona fide, would it?
I'm not sure that I follow your point.
If she makes 6 findings, serious findings against Mr. Motsoeneng, and for some reason says the disciplinary action must deal with 3 of them,
yes,
do you think a board acting bona fide could decline to deal with the other 3? Or would that not reflect an attitude that we are going to do the bare minimum with a view to ensuring that Mr. Motsoeneng is not dismissed?
I'm not sure that this case deals with that, my lord.
Well,
this case deals with what the SABC should have done pursuant to the Public Protector's report.
But you're emphasising the point that this is all that the disciplinary action had to deal with in terms of the remedial action. I appreciate what the focus of this case is, but the starting point, that this is all we have to do, is symptomatic of what the applicant and the Public Protector say is the attitude of the board, which is not to be bona fide in dealing with these matters, but as it were to do the bare minimum. In other words, it starts out from the contention that Mr. Motsoeneng is a good executive who should remain.
Firstly, it's not the board that has to do this, it's the initiator and the independent chairman who will consider this matter. That's clear. But secondly, we can only deal with the case as it is on the papers. We can't now say that the SABC, and I don't act for the board, I act for the SABC. Let me make that clear, there is no board other than the chairman. The SABC can instigate or can bring about an inquiry, disciplinary inquiry. But the initiator must deal with it.
Well, it must at least comply with the Public Protector's report, but it must generally act bona fide. I mean, can I just raise one matter? Because it's a point of concern. It rose after the Public Protector's report, but it's, for example, what Mr. Motsoeneng originally said about his attempts to contact Ms. Swanepoel, and the subsequent facts which have emerged about that, and what the SCA said about it. Now, if there's going to be a disciplinary inquiry, could a bona fide board refrain, for example, from including that? Because it doesn't have to limit itself to the charges that the Public Protector put in.
Well, Lord, I can't speak for the board, but what I can
Sorry,
say...
well, I speak with the board because generally that is the party. I speak of the SABC.
Yeah. It may be that the SAB will consider other matters as well. But certainly what it has to do is to deal with those three matters. That it has to do. And there's no question about that. But whether it deals with anything else, that's a different case. That's not the case we have to meet here. And
but the point
what your Lordship is postulating is a further DA application at some future state. No doubt.
No, I think that
they like litigating.
Mr. Du Toit, I think the point that's being made is if one have the bona fides and the SABC says, but this is what the Public Protector says, we are only limited to what's on the paper here. But if it appears that further information comes to the fore and transpire, then surely one would expect that a bona fide SABC or board will also include those matters.
Yes, my Lord, clearly. Clearly, there can be no doubt that when the board then exists, when it's reappointed by the President after recommendation by the committee, that board will certainly be able to consider whether further matter should be dealt with by an inquiry. But that's not the case we're dealing with here.
I mean, ultimately, the end objective is to make sure that one has competent, honest, trustworthy people in top positions.
Well, yes, but that deals with a different question, which I want to deal with later, arising from a suggestion from Mr. Justice Rogers about rationality. But I'd like to deal with that in a different context, if I may. If I may just complete on the affidavit. In paragraph 23, what she says here, in the case of these clear findings, indicating that Mr. Motsoeneng was not an appropriate person to be appointed to any position in the SABC and the board appointed Mr. Motsoeneng as permanent CEO. Well, that of course is no longer the case, but once again I underline in this paragraph the word findings. So I would submit, and it goes on, it actually, if I mention, I'd like to mention paragraph 37, paragraph 38, paragraph 39. And this is really what she now contends. I am therefore advised and submit that the appointment of Mr. Motsoeneng in any position at the SABC, particularly a position of authority and leadership, would improper until such time as the SAB's application for a review has been finalized. For a review. So her attitude, as expressed yesterday, is a departure from what she says here.
I appreciate you're not briefed in the Gauteng matter, but this change of stance or your fresh understanding now of what the Public Protector actually says, how does it leave matters? Because to some extent, it seems the board has, or the SABC, has taken the view that its disciplinary process in December last year was flawed because it assumed it included the merits. Now, it now appears that in fact it correctly included the merits, if subject to any stance that the DA or other intervening parties might adopt in the Gauteng review. Now, so the question is, do you want us to decide in this case that the disciplinary hearing is a merits hearing and a sanction hearing, or should that be left? Is that more properly left open to Gauteng? Because it seems now that neither you nor the Public Protector or the direct parties to the review in Gauteng will be arguing that the merits are excluded. But I'm not sure if we can exclude the possibility that somebody will intervene to say it's sanctions only.
Well, my Lord, as I understand the review, it is to set aside the findings of the Public Protector by a court, as required by the Nkandla judgment, as required by the Supreme Court of Appeals judgment.
But one of the main purposes of that, as the review is summarized in the papers before us, is that it doesn't allow the merits to be investigated in the disciplinary hearing.
Exactly.
And now that appears possibly to be a misconception.
Well, that's an interpretation. That's a concession made by the Public Protector. Whether that's correct in law or not, a court must decide.
And must be decided in this case.
Knowing what we know now.
If we're going to direct a new inquiry to be held, it seems to me that it's inevitable that one has to say what it can deal with.
In our submission, an inquiry, a proper disciplinary inquiry, having regard to Section 23 rights, having regard to the rights under Section 185 and 186 of the Labour Relations Act, must necessarily inquire into the merits.
There's no doubt at the level of labour law that is so.
Yes.
But theoretically, assuming the Public Protector's remedial action had said a disciplinary inquiry which must determine on the basis of the accepted findings in this report what sanctions should be imposed on Mr. Motsoeneng, that would be binding remedial action until it was set aside.
Correct.
Even if it would violate labour rights. But it might then provide the SABC or Mr. Motsoeneng with a strong case for review. So in any event, your contention is that the understanding that Mr. Labuschagne has now conveyed accords with what... do you accept that the Public Protector's report is capable of the interpretation that her remedial action, insofar as disciplinary action is concerned, is one in which the charges can be investigated on their merits?
On our reading of the affidavits and her report, and against the background of the findings in the Nkandla judgment and also of the Supreme Court of Appeal, it had appeared to us, and we think persuasively, that we could not challenge in a disciplinary inquiry, challenge the merits. What I call the merits.
Well, let's leave aside what the Public Protector has said in her affidavit subsequently, because ultimately this is a matter of the interpretation of her report.
Correct.
Do you adopt the stance that as matters stand, in the light of the Nkandla judgment, the disciplinary inquiry itself, and not merely the board, has to accept the factual findings? In other words, until your review is heard and potentially granted, that is the state of play.
That's exactly what we describe in our heads of argument as the dilemma that we had. This is the dilemma which the SABC had. On the one hand, the labour relations rights, the labour law rights of Mr. Motsoeneng. On the other hand, the binding quality of her findings. There was this opposition. We of course submit that the fundamental right under Section 23 cannot be defeated by the Public Protector. That's clear. But certainly, if she issues or makes findings which are written in concrete, then that poses a very difficult problem for us as the SABC, and that's the way it's been interpreted.
Well, the question always is who is bound by them. The remedial action is directed at, in this instance, the board. We know Mr. Motsoeneng, although he's interviewed in the process by the public protector, he doesn't there get to cross-examine people who criticise him. So why should one interpret her remedial action insofar as it directs a disciplinary inquiry to be held as binding Mr. Motsoeneng and the chairperson of the inquiry as to what the facts are? What must happen is that there must be a bona fide implementation of the remedial action. So the charges must be put and the case must be properly presented.
Put differently, is the SABC board, and to an extent the minister, is bound by her findings. They can't go and have another inquiry, but the disciplinary committee stand on its own legs in order to deal with the issues.
Well, that is the significant change which we now perceive. That's a significant change which we now perceive. And that's not what was reflected on the papers. And we've...
Well, it is still the position of the DA, so bear in mind that the applicant here is the DA, not the public protector.
Yes.
So the DA's position is that it's sanctions only.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. That's the case we've come to meet here. And we say that can't be right.
Well, no. The case you've mainly come to meet seems to me now directed at the second application, not the disciplinary application. That, in the main case, it's still very much an issue whether, while the public protector's findings stand, the SABC itself can appoint Mr. Motsoeneng to a senior position. There we're not talking about a disciplinary inquiry.
That raises a different point, which I'd like to address you on. But I'm now dealing only with the...
I think we need to press on. Okay,
that's fine. If I may refer you to the Nkandla judgment, and perhaps the wisdom of the Chief Justice should not be lost on any of us, because he does say May I refer you to the judgment? I don't know if you have it in front of you.
I don't have it in front of me, but,
but you can read out the relevant
just identify the paragraphs.
Yes. I refrain from reading the text because I find that
tedious,
boring. But what he does say is that he does seem to create room for differences and a situation-based approach, if I may put it that way. In other words, he in this judgment, which sets out the position very clearly, I will refer you to page 609, paragraph 7 of the judgment. And then also at page 610, paragraph 73. And particularly these words: what remedial action, when remedial action is binding, compliance is not optional, whatever reservations the affected party may have about the fairness, appropriateness, or lawfulness. And then he goes on in the next paragraph to debate the question of whether the public protector's decisions amount to administrative acts. But on a careful reading, there might be ground, and I say this in the light of what I regard as a significant concession, there might be room in the Nkandla judgment for saying that the remedial action in this matter can include a revisiting of the findings of the public protector, which otherwise everybody had assumed were final and binding.
Just like a judicial commission can inquire into state capture.
You won't mind if I don't address you on that. So we came here because what the DA is trying to do is to prescribe to the SABC who they may employ. They are saying you can't employ this man because we don't like him, for one reason or another. Our answer to that was, you can't tell us who to employ, and it will set a very bad precedent. If a political party could come along and just dictate to an organ of state who they may employ. That's the first point. The second point, as we said, he has rights. He has labour law rights, and those rights must be respected. And thirdly, we say, in any event, a finding by this court along the lines sought by the Democratic Alliance would be premature in the light of the fact that we have conceded that a disciplinary inquiry must be held, a new one must be held. And in any event, it would be premature in the light of the review. And that's why we ask that that be stayed.
Disciplinary?
Suspended, yes.
The new inquiry?
Yes, because the basis on which the inquiry be held may be in fact set aside in the review. Now, I'm not briefed in the review, so I can't speak authoritatively of that, but nevertheless, that's how we understand it. Now, a point which has been raised here a number of times, and more particularly by Mr. Justice Rogers, is whether it is rational to appoint somebody against whom findings have been made, unflattering and condemnatory findings have been made, to a senior executive position. Now, we suggest respectfully that there's a fallacy in that approach. It's what the late Professor de Wet might have called a denkfout. The first point is, what is the job description of this position? And that job description does appear on the papers. It's at page 929. And if one looks at it, and I'm sure that Mr. Bester's client won't mind if I say it, it looks as if he's really a glorified public relations officer. He has external duties. He works with presumably other broadcasting stations. He also has organizational duties in regard to the various regional offices of the SABC. If one looks in particular at the main purpose of the position. The second point we want to make, so to conclude that point, he has no defining role as he had as Chief Operations Officer. He doesn't have that role. It's a subordinate role. The second point, of course, is that it's not a statutory office. The Chief Operations Officer is a statutory office. It's dealt with in the Broadcasting Act. But being a group executive is not a statutory office. The third point we want to make is that there was no appointment to this position. And in that regard, I would ask you to refer particularly to Mr. Aguma's affidavit at page 1095.
.1095 I have a grievance for.
No, sorry, I've given you the wrong reference. Just one moment. I've been misled by my juniors, and sometimes I'm... It's paragraph 11, it's 1067 in fact, sorry. Let's start at 11.20. The judgment of Davis J. did not, however, have the effect that Mr. Motseneng was no longer an employee of SABC. Now, Mr. Bester in his heads of argument has quite clearly addressed the difference between being a director and being an employee, and I don't need to repeat that. He was first appointed as an employee in 1995, was an employee in the position of Group Executive Stakeholder Relations at the time he was appointed as COO. He therefore, the SABC was advised, remained an employee, notwithstanding the ratification of his appointment as COO. Now, just in this context, Mr. Justice Rogers raised a point concerning whether his term of appointment would run after 5 years. He raised in, I think it was 2011, would have expired already. I think those were the point. I would ask you to refer to section 186 of the Labour Relations Act, which defines dismissal. Dismissal means that an employee employed in terms of a fixed-term contract of employment reasonably expected the employer to renew a fixed-term contract of employment on the same or similar terms, but the employer offered to renew it on less favourable terms or did not renew it. So,
sorry, just read the phrase again.
I'm reading from paragraph, from section 186, 1B, small Roman 1 of the Labour Relations Act.
Yes, would you just read it again?
Yes. To renew a fixed-term contract of employment on the same or similar terms, but the employer offered to renew it on less favourable terms or did not renew it. Or, and goes on, to retain the employee in employment on an indefinite basis, but otherwise in the same.
It seems peculiar that a person can have a fixed-term contract which says you have no expectation of renewal, and then to say, well, a failure to renew it is a dismissal. But the answer may be it's a dismissal, but not an unfair one.
No, my lord, that's a dismissal. That's a dismissal. So, and a dismissal is qualified in terms of section 186 and 100.
Mr. Dutoy, on that basis,
yes.
Can you go to page 1096 of the record? 1096.
1096.
That was a letter to Mr. Motseneng from the board.
Yes.
Where the SABC executive directors have decided to comply with the Supreme Court of Appeal judgment and the effect thereof is that Mr. Motsoeneng will return to his former position as Group Executive, Stakeholder Relations and Province, as now named Corporate Affairs, with immediate effect at the scale code 115. So it appears what has happened there is the group or the SABC executive directors have decided he will just have to revert to his old position.
Well, I was reading from paragraph at 1067, the paragraph 1121,
yes,
where Mr. Aguma explains that. I was further advised that the effect of the judgment was to restore the status quo ante regarding Mr. Motsoeneng's employment that prevailed at the time that he was appointed in the office of COO. He was thus, as a matter of fact, an employee in the position of Group Executive. I informed him accordingly. I attach a copy of the letter. So, Mr. Aguma's approach was to say, right, Mr. Justice Davis has ruled that there's no question you can be COO, but now you fall back to what you were.
And were there then two people in that position?
No, because the Group Chief Executive Officer can allocate portfolios as he wishes.
Yes, but without deciding that Mr. Guana was going to move to a different position, if by operation of law Mr. Motsoeneng became the Corporate Affairs GE, then there were two people unless some other decision was taken.
Well, the decision was taken in cooperation with Mr. Guana that she would occupy a different group executive position.
She couldn't be compelled to do that.
No, I don't suggest she could compel, but the chief executive officer can allocate portfolios to group executives. That's what his job is. So,
and
the real point is he fell back to his position as an executive, a group executive. Whether he did A or B or C is really irrelevant.
But without an entitlement, unless a decision was made to allocate him a portfolio, he fell back as a person entitled to employment benefits, but without at that stage the allocation of responsibilities. Well, I put that to you for comment.
Yes.
Because it seems to me that at very least some decision must have been made that of the people at the SABC on our payroll, Mr. Motsoeneng will be the person to have this portfolio. And of course they had to conclude they did conclude a 5-year contract. And on top of that, not on the terms of a corporate affairs executive, but on the terms that he had as the acting COO.
Yes, that's also dealt with in the Labour Relations Act. You can't reduce his benefits because that amounts to a dismissal.
Well, if the benefits arise from a position to which the appointment to which has been set aside, I'm not sure that's correct. But anyway, that's perhaps less significant.
Yes. Mr. Aguma explains that the 5-year term is what every group executive has. But it doesn't mean to say that you cease to be an employee after the 5 years. I've tried to indicate that by reference to Section 186 of the Labour Relations Act.
The important point is, does this line of argument, the no appointment line of argument, have traction if a decision was required in order to determine that the portfolio that Mr. Motsoeneng would carry out would be that of corporate affairs?
Yes, it has traction in this sense also. And that's where we suggest that the approach or the question raised as to rationality is an irrelevance. And it's this, that his allocation to that job was not an administrative act. It was not an administrative act, and therefore rationality does not arise. And in that regard, I would ask you to look at a recent judgment of the Supreme Court of Appeal called State Information Technology Agency SOC Ltd versus Gijima Holdings Pty Limited. And it's...
What's the reference?
It's 2016 ZASCA 143, 30 September 2016. Now, in this regard, we know that the DA has, in their somewhat self-righteous way, claimed that they bring this application under the rubric of legality. Now, what the Supreme Court of Appeal says in this judgment is that legality is, yes, it is a part of the rule of law, but you have to proceed in terms of PAJA, in terms of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. That's the first port of call.
Is that correct? Is that what the SCA say?
Whether it's correct or not, that's what the SCA says.
So if it's administrative action, you must use PAJA.
Well, they say, can I read it to you? It's at paragraph 34. But the burgeoning principle of legality is arguably a greater threat to PAJA than recourse to the common law because it regulates the exercise of all public power. This includes, in addition to administrative decisions covered by Section 33 in PAJA, power exercised by the legislature and the executive. Then they quote an English judge, which we needn't look at, and paragraph 35. Because of the ubiquitous reach of the principle of legality and the fact that the administrative actions also fall within its remit, it is unsurprising that litigants and the courts have sometimes deliberately sidestepped PAJA. The reason is obvious. It is at times difficult to work out whether the unlawful action complained of qualifies as administrative action. Many of the elements of the definition remain unsettled. One only has to look at the difficulty courts have had in establishing whether the action in question has satisfied the element of having a direct external legal effect to demonstrate the nature of the problem. But it's not a problem that can legitimately be avoided. For if a litigant or a court could simply avoid having to conduct the sometimes testing analytical inquiry into whether the action complained of amounts to administrative action, PAJA, in Professor Hoekster's words, would soon become redundant. Put differently, the consequence of this would be that the principle of legality, unencumbered by PAJA's definitional and procedural complexities, would become the preferred choice of litigants and the courts, which is happening increasingly, and PAJA would fall into desuetude. This would be a perverse development of the law, one that the framers of the Constitution could not have contemplated when they drafted Section 33(3) of the Constitution.
I'm sure Mr. Katz is going to refer us in reply to a case, but I can't put my finger on it, where I think the Constitutional Court said that one shouldn't decide whether something is administrative action if one doesn't have to. In which case there will be either Homer or Virgil nodded.
Well, I can only rely on what is binding on this court.
But the circumstances in which that will matter, the distinction will matter, is if a particular time limit would apply on PAJA but might not apply to legality. Is that an issue here?
180 days, for instance, yes. But more important in this case was this appointment, call it an appointment, was his falling back into his job or his appointment, was that an administrative act?
Well, even if it wasn't, would you say there's one might say, because the legality principle applies what? To the exercise of public power?
Yes.
So the question might still be, was this appointment an exercise of public power?
But then you can't avoid, that's what the Supreme Court of Appeal says, you can't avoid having to determine whether that was an administrative act. Did it have Außenwirkung, as the Germans say? It didn't. This is an internal matter.
Is your submission that it isn't administrative action? That the appointment was not administrative action?
Absolutely.
well, then we no longer have to be concerned with that. The question is it an exercise of a public power to which the legality principle can apply?
No, it isn't. It's an internal matter. It's an internal matter. It's an employer allocating a job to an employee.
And the same would apply if, without appointing him as COO, he had in fact been allocated a series of responsibilities which accorded with that of a COO.
Well, that's not the case.
No, I'm just saying, you're saying once the...
No, what you're suggesting, my lord, is vrouwsleggers. It's not a question here of vrouwsleggers. He's appointed to a different job. He doesn't have the power of a COO.
But so your argument would apply to any appointment other than, I think, the 3 executive appointments which are reserved to the minister by the legislation?
Absolutely. On what basis can a political party come dictate who's going to be appointed in the SABC to some job? Merely because it's an organ of state. Does it mean that a political party can start prescribing to departments of the administration who they may employ? But your lordship is avoiding what the Supreme Court of Appeal says you cannot avoid. You've got to define first whether it is an administrative act with external operation.
I'm not with respect to avoiding it. I was trying to suggest to you that if your argument is right, it doesn't matter, because on your argument it is neither administrative action nor the exercise of a public power. So there are limits to the legality principle as much as there are to administrative action.
Yes, but as we understand the Gijima judgment, it is that the court cannot avoid dealing with the matter in terms of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. Just to complete this at page 1067, what Mr. Zuma says at paragraph 11.22, my letter was merely a confirmation of Mr. Motseneng's falling back to his previous employment status and not any form of new appointment. I point out also that group executive posts are held for 5 years.
So is assuming that decision to engage him in the new position is regarded as flying in the face of the public protector's findings for as long as they stand, you say a court's powerless to deal with it?
Yes, I think the element of deference also should arise here. The element of deference which a court should have in regard to matters which fall under executive powers. This court cannot, at the instance of a political party, tell the SABC who they can employ. It's not a statutory post. He's not employed in a statutory capacity at all.
So your answer is that the court is powerless to deal with it?
Yes. What is perhaps important is that he's holding that position is really a business decision taken by the Chief Executive Officer, the Group Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Zuma. It's allocated him a job, he's an employee, he hasn't been dismissed, and that's not the effect of Mr. Justice Davis's judgment. He hasn't been dismissed as an employee, and in fact, this court cannot dismiss him as an employee.
If there were a quorate board, would it, in the face of the public protector's findings for as long as they stand, would it be permissible for the board to stand by and allow its chief executive officer to allocate this portfolio to a person against whom these findings have been made, assuming for the moment that the job description renders it inappropriate for him to be so appointed. Could the board stand by and allow that? Because the board is bound by the public protector's findings. We have a situation where there isn't a board that can bring Mr. Aguma to book if this is a patently irrational decision. But it shouldn't be allowed to be the case.
Lord, that appears to be the same point as your Lordship was previously making about whether it was a rational decision.
Yes, no, that goes back earlier. I'm trying to deal with your, explore your point that, however, assuming it is irrational, there's nothing a court can do about it. And I'm suggesting that if the board is bound by the public protector's findings, then it cannot stand by and allow one of its executives to do something which flies in the face of it. And the only reason why we can't seek why relief can't be sought against the board now is because it doesn't exist.
The board has the primary responsibility for running the corporation. That's clear. And it has a discretion in this context. It's governed by legislation and the way in which it must do it. Yes. But it does not mean to say that the chief executive officer, who is entitled to employ people, is necessarily bound by the adverse findings in relation to that appointment. It's not a statutory appointment, it's a business decision which Mr. Aguma makes. And Mr. Aguma, in his affidavit, says a number of things about Mr. Motsoeneng. He says he's a colourful big character, but he has value. He's an asset to the corporation. His negotiating skills are, Mr. Aguma says, are particularly strong. He saved the corporation money in relation to a particular contract, a large amount of money. He has taken the initiative in relation to 2 programs, neither of which I have actually seen, but nevertheless, he's taken the initiative in regard to an encore program, I think it was, and the other one was, I forget now, but he's taken that initiative. He's also initiated programs, or he wishes to start channels dealing with, or not dealing with, but in languages, in other languages of South Africa. In other words, other official languages. So he's regarded as an asset. Now, that corporate decision, that business decision by Mr. Aguma, how can that be said where Mr. Motsoeneng does not occupy a statutory position? On what basis can this court interfere?
Well, to put the more extreme case, say the public protectors, as a result of her findings, said that the SABC shall not employ Mr. Motsoeneng in any position whatsoever. And
she has said it, yes.
Yes, and I'm saying in her report, she'd specifically said that.
Yeah.
As part of her remedial action. If the SABC, represented by its chief executive officer, were to employ him to a position which isn't one of those reserved to the minister, it's a staffing decision falling within the remit of the CEO, make such an appointment, one could come to court and say the SABC, in this instance represented by its CEO, has done something contrary to the public protector's report. One wouldn't really have to say it's administrative action, it's exercise of public power. It would suffice to say it is contrary to in conflict with something which was binding on the SABC, represented by whoever had the authority to represent it in the decision in question. So here, we have not such a clear case, but all the same, if the SABC is bound to honour the public protector's findings, does it matter who represents it for a particular decision? That it's the board or the CEO or, for that matter, a lesser person. If the SABC, ultimately, if you ask Mr. Motsoeneng who his contract was with, it's not with Mr. Zuma, it's with the SABC.
Yes, of course, my Lord. But your Lordship is postulating a hypothetical case, and that's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing here with what her recommendation was, her binding recommendation, her remedial action, was a disciplinary inquiry. Now, if the findings of the disciplinary inquiry confirm that Mr. Motsoeneng is unsuitable for any position, as in fact the Democratic Alliance wants it, well then that's a decision which the SABC must then take as to what they do. And that would flow from Mr. Motsoeneng's labour relations or labour law rights. In other words, would he be demoted? Would he be suspended for a period? Would he be dismissed? Dismissal is only the final remedy. But that's the remedy which the Democratic, the applicant in this case, wants already to anticipate. He must be dismissed now.
But Mr. Du Toit, if one unpacks your argument, it appears what you're saying is that we've got the public protector's finding. That's for the SABC to adhere to. But what happens internally, it's for the SABC to run its own internal affairs, if I understand it correctly. But what we've got here is the findings stand. I mean, Mr. Motsoeneng's employment contract is not with the internal department, it is with the SABC.
Yes. But surely the SABC can run its affairs as it thinks best.
Well, but we've got findings here of the public protector that's extremely adverse against Mr. Motsoeneng.
Yes.
And now what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, is that despite all of that, what the SABC do internally has got nothing to do with anyone else.
The CEO, you say, after a disciplinary process, assuming a disciplinary process finds that he's guilty on all charges, and recommends his dismissal, and the CEO looks at it and says, okay, well, I think a first warning is appropriate. It's an internal decision, nothing to be done about it.
Well, I think the disciplinary inquiry, or the body that administers it makes a finding, not the CEO.
It may be that the disciplinary chair himself makes
they would decide
sanction.
on what the sanction is. That's how I understand it happens, and that's what the disciplinary code also says. But once again, my Lord, Mr. Justice Lafranci, once again, you are anticipating the result of the disciplinary inquiry. You're saying that because of these findings, which we now know can be upset, according to the public protector, by a disciplinary inquiry, therefore, in the meantime, he must be dismissed, and he's not allowed to hold any position. And that interferes in the right of the SABC to run its affairs. It is, after all, a company. The fact that its shareholders, the state, doesn't make it less an independent entity.
Well, the public protector's report was precisely concerned with how the SABC did run its affairs.
Yes, indeed. But that is so, but that's not the question that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with whether he can hold a job on a lower level, which is not a statutory job, and whether this court can interfere with that. On what basis? It has been mentioned in this court that some of the other cases that have been mentioned is, for instance, I think it was called the Similarity judgment. Of course, for that job, there are jurisdictional requirements. There are no jurisdictional requirements for the appointment as a group executive. And even in the judgment of Mr. Justice Davis, he conceded in paragraph 52, if one looks at his judgment, that if the disciplinary inquiry in fact finds that all these charges are not valid, then he can conceivably be Chief Operations Officer. That's what Mr. Justice Davis found. Your Lordships have contemplated the modification, if I put it that way, of the relief which the Democratic Alliance sought. There's no amendment to that, the relief it seeks.
So modification, what are you referring to there?
The modification in some way, it's been debated here as to whether the suspension should be made on full pay or whether he should be, that's not what the Democratic Alliance asks for. They say you can't hold any position at all. So we come to meet that case, not one which is modified here. They've not asked for alternative relief.
Well, the greater includes, if one feels, if the court considers that relief should be granted but not in its most extreme form, then without amendments the court can fashion something falling short of it. What we can't do is grant greater relief that wasn't sought.
Yes, of course. I would like to refer you also to a judgment by Mr. Justice Mulambo, just dealing with procedural fairness. It's in the Labour Appeal Court. It is, it's called, I can't pronounce it, SCEPPWAWU.
Yes, that was one of the trade unions that didn't adopt a convenient acronym.
Yes. An inconvenient acronym. Against Metrofile, perhaps that's easier. And where he referred in particular at paragraph...
Sorry, the reference? The citation?
Oh, sorry, yes. It's case JA 37/01.
I'm not sure that's going to help us very much. Is it on SAFLI or in a labour law report? You don't know at this stage.
Juniors to provide the judgments in some form.
All right, what year was it in?
It's
is it on SAFLI?
It probably would be, but
it's fairly recent. He was. Sorry, I can't even see that. It's a judgment of Mr. Justice Mlambo, Mr. Justice Zondo, and Mr. Justice Goldstein, all in the appeal court. Got something more. Oh, yes, thank you, my lord. I've now been, it's 2003 ZALAC, ZALAC 22, 9 December 2003. It's just to...
Sorry, what's the number after the LAC? 2003 Labour Appeal Court?
ZALAC 22.
22.
Yes. I apologize that I don't have a clearer reference here. It's just that in paragraph 55, he states that the right to be afforded a fair hearing before one's dismissal is indeed an integral part of our law. The right is explicitly recognized by the Act and has been restated on numerous occasions in this court. So there can be no doubt that the attaching immutable consequences to the remedial action conflicts with fair labour practice. Now, one of the things that has been attacked here was the Eardling hearing. Can I call it the Eardling hearing? And in fact, the Democratic Alliance has gone so far as to accuse my colleague in Bloemfontein of being part of a conspiracy, an unfair accusation which I think he does not deserve. If one reads his ruling, it is quite clear that the initiator sought a postponement in order to call further evidence to substantiate the charges. But Mr. Eardling, in his wisdom, regarded that as being an indulgence which he was not prepared to grant. So it's not the fault of the initiator for not seeking to adduce more evidence to the hearing. It is the decision of Mr. Eardling, and to call him part of a conspiracy is really far-fetched. And certainly, it doesn't reflect on the SABC, because that's Mr. Eardling's decision. Not the SABC's.
What may reflect on the SABC is that once Mr. Makari decided to dismiss or to say that the disciplinary charge had become moot, Mr. Polani was instructed, and one infers from whoever within the SABC gave instructions, that he had to deal with the case on the same day that he was notified to take it over. So it's hardly surprising that he was not in a position to present the case properly.
Yeah, I think it's quite excusable that he couldn't present the case as fully as he would have liked to.
Yes, personally, I didn't see that Mr. Polani was necessarily to be blamed, or for that, I don't know about. I don't want to cast aspersions.
There's nothing on the record to tell us why they were, when Mr. Mukari withdrew, why they were given short notice. Perhaps the pressure of the 60 days caused that. One doesn't know. It's possible that the SAB said, well, Mukari has pulled out, what do we do now? Let's find a different advocate and appoint him, and we have to do it quickly. It's unfortunate, but it's not explained on the papers. But to accuse Mr. Eardling of being part of a conspiracy is far-fetched. Now, I want to deal with a few points and a few authorities and if I can just refer briefly to our heads of argument, which I've not done so far. I want to, in paragraph 4 of our heads of argument, which were prepared by the three of us. Unfortunately, Mr. Curry could not be here for personal reasons. Paragraph 4. The SABC has conceded there are grounds for review and setting aside of disciplinary proceedings. That's clear. Paragraph 5, we do not contest that the SABC board is currently unable to find a former court. Well, when this was written, there were still a few people there, but now, in fact, there's nobody there except Professor Maguire. And that fact impacts on the validity of the appointment by the Minister of Ms. Duwan as acting COO. That is so because there's no board to confirm, board to confirm her appointment. So that we concede also. We say that the